Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Lost His Memories Forever? Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. For the Bakugo family, everything was easy. They had the world in the palm of their hands and never struggled to get what they wanted, especially as owners of the second largest company in Japan. Thanks to advanced technology, Katsuki was certain that everything would belong to him one day and he would surpass the #1 company. The alarm invaded his sleep as it always did. He was fed up with that noise and, without much thought, he flung the offending clock away. A hot shower jolted him fully awake and reinforced the image he liked of himself, flawless and unmatched. He dressed in an elegant outfit that only amplified that confidence: a white shirt, a dark tie, a fitted jacket, and slim black trousers that accented his build. Breakfast was routine: a fried egg with plenty of chili, buttered French toast, refried beans to his taste, and a strawberry milkshake. He brushed his teeth meticulously, preparing for another day of success. Failure was a word he had not yet accepted. When the chauffeur finally called about the car, Katsuki erupted in anger at the delay and cursed about the wasted time. The chauffeur tried to calm him, but Katsuki continued to berate him. The chauffeur apologized and explained he had been late by 30 minutes. Katsuki dismissed the apology with characteristic impatience. He climbed into one of his company cars, a sleek black Honda, and continued to scold the driver for arriving late. The driver, trying to defuse the situation, made a joke about bringing something to help if Katsuki was not feeling well. Katsuki's expression hardened so much that the driver quickly apologized again, visibly nervous. Kirishima, opening the door for him with a grin, teased him playfully by calling him princess, and Katsuki immediately snapped in retaliation before forcing himself to step away and keep the scene from escalating further. Outside the building, Kirishima greeted him warmly and mentioned that Kaminari had already left. The three of them rode the elevator up while talking casually. Katsuki muttered that they were a pair of idiots, a remark that Kirishima heard but took in stride. Kirishima was Katsuki's right hand, attentive to everything, good at digging up trivial details, and a little forgetful, which earned him and Kaminari the nicknames of Idiot 1 and Idiot 2. Katsuki's office was large and luxurious, with a spectacular view. His good mood faltered when he noticed something at the corner of the company entrance: a homeless man who, in his eyes, ruined the pristine image of the building. He muttered to himself about putting trash where it belonged, though he kept working on new car models, determined to design the best sports cars and to secure his succession as head of the company. At 22, he was already set on that path. Kirishima approached with documents and informed Katsuki that Todoroki had come by to deliver papers for a business proposal. Katsuki snatched the papers brusquely and said he had already refused, convinced that the other company was trying to overshadow his brand with a reminiscent name. Kirishima argued that forming an alliance with that manufacturer would be a valuable opportunity, as they were one of the best brands in the world. Katsuki's pride made him resistant, but he relented enough to instruct Kirishima to read the contract carefully and bring it back to his office. Kirishima left with confidence, promising to let their mother know and to make sure everything went smoothly. Katsuki returned his gaze to the street below, his irritation lingering because of the person blocking the entrance. His mother called at that moment. She scolded him sharply on the phone and demanded that he come to her office, reminding him that she was the one in charge. Katsuki nearly threw his phone in frustration but restrained himself, put on his jacket, and prepared to go see her. Arriving quickly had always been important for Mitsuki Bakugo, especially when it came to her son. She wanted the best for him, and she believed the most important lessons were humility and respect. She did not yet know that she was about to give him the most important lesson of his life. Katsuki almost collided with a woman, 2 employees, and a door on his way to his mother's office. He knew Mitsuki was angry and that if he did not get there fast she might blow up at him. He opened the office door formally and waited for his mother's confirmation. Mitsuki addressed him with a sharp question, clearly upset. Katsuki met her glare but did not apologize. Mitsuki ordered him roughly to sit, and he planted himself across from her as if forced. Katsuki asked what the problem was. At first he could not remember why she had made such a scene, then he recalled the person standing in front of the building that morning and burst into complaint about someone he considered a nuisance outside his company. Mitsuki reacted with disbelief and reminded him who she was and that she had not yet decided anything about the company. She told him not to proclaim himself boss. Katsuki insisted they move on from titles and focused on getting that person out of sight. Mitsuki questioned his language. Katsuki shot back, sarcastically asking whether she intended to bring the person home for tea. She scolded him and told him to be more respectful. The person outside was someone they did not know and might have had reasons for their situation. Katsuki bristled at being lectured. Mitsuki laughed suddenly and said she had an idea. She announced that she would give him a special test. Katsuki protested that he was not a child and that he had grown beyond uselessness. Mitsuki cut him off and told him to listen. She said he would do exactly as she instructed, and when he completed it she would grant him the company presidency. The promise of the presidency hit the target. The idea of leading the company was what Katsuki wanted most, and he immediately became interested. Katsuki agreed to hear her plan, putting on the sly half-smile she recognized. Mitsuki explained that he would bring the person he had been insulting to her office personally and present them as a civilized, respectful, well-mannered individual. He alone would handle the task. If she found out he had received help from anyone else, he would never hear the end of it and would lose the chance at the presidency. Katsuki felt humiliated and furious. He could not believe his mother had asked for such a thing. Mitsuki reminded him that the person in question was a human being and deserved respect. She ordered him to leave her office, pointing toward the door. Katsuki slammed the door as he left, earning a headache. On the walk back to his own office he cursed under his breath, fuming that someone he considered beneath notice could be so important. He arrived at his destination with the conversation with his mother filling his head. Katsuki had been distracted through a meeting with Kirishima about a contract between companies. Kirishima assured him the contract was perfect, and Ijiro was excited, but Katsuki had only been answering with automatic okays while replaying his mother's demand. After Kirishima left, Katsuki looked again toward the spot he had noticed that morning and saw the same person still sitting there. He wondered whether the man could not move. From the distance the man's face was hard to make out, but Katsuki saw him seated and staring into space as if numb. He decided to get a closer look to make sure the man was alive. As he approached, people walked past without paying attention. Katsuki confirmed the man was alive when he saw him blink. The distance between them closed to about 2 meters, and a strong odor reached Katsuki's nose. He muttered in disgust and covered his nose with his hand. Up close, the man's skin was very dark, his hair black and his eyes green. Katsuki thought the man might be of mixed heritage. The man looked far away, unaware of Katsuki's presence, and that only made Katsuki angrier. Katsuki spoke sharply to get the man's attention, calling him an idiot. The man did not look toward him but seemed fixed on some point in space, lost in thought. Katsuki raised his voice and demanded a response. The man trembled in fright and covered his face with his hands. Katsuki tried to be assertive in his own way, but a vendor's cry interrupted them. A donut seller called that the fresh donuts were hot and available. The sound startled the man, causing him to lower his hands slightly and reveal tearful eyes. Katsuki, perhaps unexpectedly softening, asked if the man was hungry. The man began to sob lightly. Katsuki called to the vendor. Katsuki bought 2 donuts, one for the man and one for himself. The donuts were cheap and modest, but they were food. As they ate, they looked at each other. The man trembled but managed to hold Katsuki's gaze with tear-filled green eyes. Katsuki found it difficult to move closer, so he stayed where he was. It began to grow dark, and the man started trembling more than before. Katsuki fixed his gaze on the young man and asked whether he intended to stay there. When the man nodded, Katsuki, impatient and blunt, demanded why he had remained silent and whether something had taken his voice. Katsuki demanded an answer. The small boy trembled like a chihuahua and began to cry inconsolably. Someone hurriedly shushed him, which only made him cry louder, and Katsuki finally shouted for him to be quiet. The boy fell silent as if a mute button had been pressed. Katsuki ran through his thoughts. First, the boy smelled bad. Second, he couldn't speak. Third, he looked different. Fourth, he seemed useless and defective. With his plan finally forming, he knew what he had to do. Katsuki offered to take the boy home, but the child continued to tremble and did not react. The blonde driver, Kaminari, arrived about 15 minutes later. Kaminari asked who Katsuki had been worrying about and why the blonde was acting strange, noticing the boy's favorite comic being taken along. Kaminari's comic had been ripped page by page and the sheets were piled on the back seat. The blonde demanded tape, leaving Kaminari in shock. He promised to buy another comic tomorrow and was told to hand over the tape. The blonde lined the seat with the comic pages and also scattered some on the floor. Kaminari questioned what Katsuki was doing, but his doubts vanished when Katsuki carried the small boy and placed him carefully on the seat now covered with paper. Katsuki closed the back door and climbed into the passenger seat. Kaminari asked if Katsuki knew where the boy lived. Katsuki replied carelessly that the boy lived by the dump, which made the small boy begin to cry again. Katsuki said he wished he could leave him there, but he could not. When Kaminari asked what he would do instead, Katsuki said he would take the boy to his house. The rest of the ride the little boy slept with that peculiar trembling that made him seem even smaller. Kaminari kept asking Katsuki if he was sure about bringing a homeless child home, puzzled that someone like Katsuki would do such a thing. Katsuki was lost in thought and only half listening. The trip was short. The boy continued to sleep like a baby. It was unpleasant, but Katsuki thought he would endure it. His campaign for the presidency was at stake, and he would not give up. With his brow deeply furrowed, he stepped out of the car, opened the back door, and roughly picked the boy up, which startled him. The boy cried and squirmed, trying to free himself, and at one point Katsuki nearly dropped him in his irritation. Katsuki barked at him to be quiet, his voice harsh enough to frighten anyone. He warned the boy sharply that if he did not stop crying he would make him stop, his tone low and dangerous. The boy froze, tears still shining in his emerald eyes. Katsuki thought to himself how striking those eyes were. A flash of movement and Kaminari's laughter snapped Katsuki back to reality. He had been on the verge of throwing everything out with the vagabond, but he remembered a promise he had to keep. Katsuki reassured the boy that he would not hurt him. The small boy's emerald eyes locked onto Katsuki's scarlet gaze and, almost without thinking, he reached up and gripped Katsuki's shirt. The boy nodded, a small, uncertain motion that showed he was still frightened but willing to trust for the moment. After the commotion, Kaminari, still with messy hair, tried to be nosy and his calls went unanswered. The immediate priority became getting rid of the boy's foul smell. Katsuki told him the bathroom was ready and, noticing how the boy could not move his legs or hands from pain, took him by the waist and carried him toward the bathroom. Katsuki was uncertain how to handle the situation. He considered hiring help, but his mother had insisted there be none. He had no clear recollection of when he had agreed to take the boy in, but before he knew it the filthy stranger was in his supposedly humble home. Katsuki assessed the trembling child up close and, despite the boy's tear-brightened eyes and pitiable state, could only see a mess that needed cleaning. He prepared to remove the dirty clothes and get the boy washed, providing clean garments for afterward. The boy, alarmed by the unfamiliar care, tensed, but Katsuki ordered him to calm down and moved with brisk efficiency. Katsuki set about getting the boy cleaned and settled. He worked with a sharp, impatient energy, but there was an undercurrent of resolve. He would keep the promise he had made. The boy, slowly easing under the steady hands, watched Katsuki with wary trust. Kaminari lingered nearby, alternating between bewildered curiosity and a growing smile at the odd turn of events. Katsuki, focused on practicalities, kept his distance emotionally but continued to act, driven by a purpose that mattered more than his pride. The small, trembling presence in his arms would stay under his roof for now, and Katsuki would ensure he was looked after until circumstances required otherwise. Katsuki decided he would give the boy a bath and, without much ceremony, roughly placed him in the tub. If anyone had seen the scene, they would have laughed at the situation for a long time. The bathwater felt pleasant, and the smaller boy shivered with a brief, involuntary relief. He glanced up with emerald eyes at the one helping him and, in a moment of gratitude, reached for the other's arm. Katsuki, however, gripped his face with visible disgust when the water turned a dark brown. Katsuki reacted angrily at the filthy water, convinced now that the boy who had seemed dark-skinned was actually quite pale. He quickly pulled him out of the tub, emptied the water, and refilled it. Katsuki called the boy filthy, his look of repulsion making the younger boy feel ashamed, but Katsuki believed it was the truth. When the tub was full again, Katsuki placed the boy in it with the same brusqueness, which caused the boy some discomfort. Katsuki poured chamomile shampoo into the boy's hair and watched the soap turn a deep red. He noticed dried blood and scabs and a small wound on the boy's head. Katsuki continued cleaning, noting the boy's distinctive green hair. The green-haired boy watched every expression on Katsuki's face, from the crease of his brow to the set of his lips. He found himself studying the older boy in return. Katsuki focused on the dirt left on the boy's face and started scrubbing. The boy relaxed slightly at the firm handling for a moment and closed his eyes to avoid getting soap in them. Katsuki noticed small freckles appearing on the boy's cheeks, 4 on each side, which briefly distracted him. Katsuki snapped out of his momentary distraction, wondering what he had been doing, and grabbed a sponge to avoid direct contact. He finished the bath quickly, skipping some areas and telling the freckled boy to take care of the rest on his own. Obedient though with difficulty, the boy finished washing himself. Katsuki gave the boy some of his own clothes because the younger boy had none. While helping him change, Katsuki noticed small cuts on the boy's arms and legs and felt a constriction in his chest at the sight of the injuries. Katsuki addressed the boy by a nickname, asking what the boy was called. The freckled boy looked confused at being called that nickname. Katsuki told him he looked like a mess, which made the boy tremble as if a sensitive subject had been touched. Ignoring the reaction, Katsuki put a large shirt with a bomb motif onto the boy and a pair of shorts that made him look even smaller. The boy, somewhat used to being carried, wrapped his legs around Katsuki's waist. Katsuki carried him to the living room to try to get some answers from the boy, if he could make him speak. Katsuki set the boy on the sofa and went to fetch bandages and antiseptic to treat the wounds. At first the boy resisted, but he complied when faced with Katsuki's stern look, enduring the discomfort. Katsuki bandaged his arms, legs, and head, studying the boy's face and height to guess his age. Katsuki asked if the boy was 9 years old. The boy quickly shook his head, pouting in a way that unexpectedly pleased Katsuki. Katsuki guessed 12. The boy kept denying it. Katsuki then asked if he was 16. The boy's eyes brightened and he nodded. Katsuki wondered aloud why he behaved like a small child, but there was no answer. Realizing the boy would not talk, Katsuki turned on the television. The freckled boy did not look away from him. His damaged trust was slowly being rebuilt by the unexpected care. A new episode of The Big Hero All Might began. Katsuki was about to change the channel, but he noticed the boy's eyes light up and a small, genuine smile, the first Katsuki had seen since finding him. Katsuki still changed the channel, partly out of embarrassment at the effect the show had on the boy. The freckled boy turned to Katsuki, crossed his arms, and formed a reproachful pout. Katsuki felt awkward and a little unsure what to do, so he switched the channel back to the hero show and looked away, embarrassed. Katsuki muttered to himself while the freckled boy watched the television, seemingly entertained. For a moment, Katsuki wondered how a homeless boy could know that program and whether the boy really was used to life on the streets. He pushed the thought away. What mattered to him, he decided, was his work and nothing else. By 9 in the evening, Katsuki's stomach growled. Before he knew it, the freckled boy had fallen asleep on the sofa, clutching a cushion, looking calm and quiet like a small pet that needed care. Katsuki realized someone would have to look after the boy while he worked. Despite everything, the boy was not as revolting as he had first thought, just helpless. The question remained, who would care for him during Katsuki's absence? Katsuki called out in frustration and then spoke with an older woman in the building about the situation and who could watch the boy. The woman responded with surprise and then with a blunt suggestion that Katsuki should not go to work. Katsuki snapped back that he could not miss work because of projects and deadlines. The woman reminded him she knew how things worked. The conversation left the problem unresolved. Kirishima assured Katsuki that he was ready to take care of everything and that, when Katsuki became president, Kirishima would take his post as vice president. Katsuki responded with exuberant agreement. Kirishima urged him to keep his promise because he wanted to meet that person. Katsuki muttered to himself, irritated but secretly pleased. He was getting closer to the position he wanted and could not believe something so small could unsettle him. He ate an apple calmly and called a doctor to come early the next morning to check the boy's wounds and figure out why he could not speak. He lifted the freckled boy from the sofa and carried him to a spare bedroom so he could stay in the house for now. The bed was comfortable, and Katsuki left the door closed before going to his own room, which was next to the freckled boy's. If there was a problem, it would be easy to hear. At 3 a.m, crying woke Katsuki from a deep sleep. He cursed under his breath and ran to the other room, where he found the freckled boy curled up on the cold floor in a corner. Katsuki's anger dissolved into concern as he watched the small figure trembling and crying with emerald eyes. Katsuki reassured him that it had only been a nightmare and that everything would be all right. The freckled boy nodded and raised his hands, asking to be picked up. Katsuki, trying to be as gentle as possible in a way he rarely allowed himself to be, carried him to the bed with careful movements. He was about to leave when the freckled boy's hand gripped his. The boy made a quiet sound, an attempt to speak that came out as a groan, and Katsuki understood what he wanted. Katsuki decided to stay until the boy fell asleep, growling that he would stay with him. They lay on either side of the bed. The freckled boy moved slowly closer to Katsuki despite the latter's attempts to look indifferent. When the boy reached out and tremulously took Katsuki's hand, Katsuki ordered him to stay still and, with a gruff demeanor and a red face, intertwined his fingers with the smaller hand. The freckled boy felt a rush of mixed emotions and was very happy, and Katsuki, surprised at his own reaction, felt an unfamiliar protectiveness toward the vulnerable person at his side. They fell asleep holding hands. Morning light began to filter in. Katsuki noticed a weight across his chest and opened his eyes to see the freckled boy sleeping pressed against him. Instead of recoiling, Katsuki watched the boy's steady breathing and felt a pleasant shiver from his fingertips to the top of his head. Unable to resist, he ran his hand through the boy's soft, curly hair. The freckled boy made a small, contented sound and stirred. Katsuki suddenly moved him to the other side of the bed with a brusque motion, startled by his own boldness, and carried the boy to the kitchen like a sack of potatoes. He set him on a tall chair at the breakfast counter and told him to stay there while he made breakfast, muttering that the boy was useless in a teasing way. The freckled boy watched Katsuki intently as he cooked. Katsuki's focused movements and the way his muscles showed as he worked caught the boy's admiration, and the boy quickly looked away, embarrassed. Katsuki brought over fried eggs, some salsa, and peas, then held up 2 drinks, asking whether the boy preferred chocolate milk or strawberry milk. The boy pointed to the chocolate milk. Katsuki placed it on the table with the meal, and the boy offered a grateful smile. Katsuki answered with a low grumble. Breakfast was quiet. Neither of them met the other's eyes because of the events from the night before. After a while, Katsuki told the boy that he had called a female doctor who would come to treat his wounds. The boy grew nervous at the thought of seeing other people. He was frightened by company, but when Katsuki promised to stay with him, the boy calmed and returned a bright, relieved smile. That moment stayed with him. By 8 a.m, they had finished breakfast. The boy entertained himself by looking for a new episode of his favorite hero on television while Katsuki updated Kirishima, whom he nicknamed Trash Hair, about the new projects they needed to deliver. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Katsuki opened the door expecting the woman he'd been waiting for, but instead found 2 familiar idiots strolling into the house as if they lived there. Katsuki demanded to know what they wanted. One of them announced that he had come for work. Katsuki frowned, sensing that they were here for something else, and told them in no uncertain terms that they should leave, insisting that technology existed for that purpose and there was no need for their presence. Kaminari pointed toward the exit and urged the others to hurry. Denki chimed in excitedly that they wanted to see the freckled boy Katsuki had found on the street. Kirishima laughed and said he needed to see who had moved the stone of Katsuki's heart. They pressed down the long corridor, eager to catch sight of the newcomer. Katsuki barked at them to get out, but in the momentary distraction a flash of movement and noise made him lose sight of the boy for a second. He ordered them out of his house, angrily calling them idiots. Kaminari shouted to get Kirishima's attention, worried that the boy was easily frightened and that seeing him upset would be a nuisance. He then noted how pale the child looked. Katsuki rushed into the living room and found exactly what he feared: the freckled boy huddled in the corner of the sofa, trembling and covering his face with his hands. Kaminari was too close, oblivious to personal space. Kirishima moved nearer, commenting that the boy looked both delicate and manly. Without thinking, Katsuki shoved the others away and scooped the child up in his strong arms. He carried him like someone would carry a frightened child and instinctively rubbed the boy's head as if to comfort him. Katsuki whispered that he was there to calm him, but the others had overheard. A camera flash went off across the room. Denki reacted with excitement at the photo, teasing that they had a new pairing to celebrate. Kirishima joined him to look at the picture and remarked on how composed and rugged Katsuki appeared. Denki joked that it had only been a day and they already looked close, and he teased about keeping an eye on them so the boy would always be safe. Katsuki, ready to explode at the invasion of privacy, left the boy on the sofa and threatened the group to stop their teasing. He was interrupted before he could continue when his mother, Mitsuki, entered the house, asking where the boy was. Kirishima quickly answered that they were here and guided Mitsuki forward so Katsuki could not interrupt. The freckled boy was terrified, made worse by being left alone with two people pressing questions he could not answer. Mitsuki, seeing his small frame and resemblance to the young man who cared for him, softened and said he was so cute and that she wished Katsuki were gentler like that. She asked whether Katsuki had treated him well. In his mind, the boy associated the name with Katsuki and nodded. Mitsuki then asked the boy his name, but he only shrugged, confused. She explained that he had not spoken a word since she found him and that she had called Recovery Girl to check what was wrong. Although the boy resisted seeing anyone, Katsuki had called for help, so they had to accept the inspection. Katsuki snapped at his mother when she scolded him, and then the doorbell rang. Recovery Girl arrived. Despite her age, she moved about with surprising energy and authority, and she came straight to the living room where the boy still trembled, clutching a small stuffed toy. Recovery Girl sat beside him on the large, comfortable sofa and greeted him kindly. At first he hid behind a pillow, but Katsuki called to him firmly and the boy allowed the doctor to examine him. Recovery Girl inspected the bandages and said the person who had applied them had done a good job and that the wounds were already disinfected. She noted there were both shallow and deeper cuts and that she would need to apply a spray to clean them and an orange-labeled cream for cell recovery. She handed the cream to Katsuki and explained the plan: the spray first, then the cream for the scalp and other wounds. She then asked who was responsible for the boy. Katsuki stepped forward and said he would take responsibility. Recovery Girl then asked to speak with him privately and led him into the kitchen. In the kitchen, Recovery Girl told Katsuki that the boy's condition was not normal. She explained that his emotions were unstable from psychological trauma, which likely affected his ability to speak and recall certain memories. She pressed Katsuki about what had happened, and he admitted he had no idea. The boy had not said a word since Katsuki had found him. Recovery Girl's expression changed as she examined the marks more closely. She told Katsuki that the injuries suggested abusive treatment with a sharp instrument rather than a simple accident. The revelation left Katsuki stunned, pained at the thought of what the boy had endured. Recovery Girl softened and added that she had expected him to be worse off but was relieved to see the boy responding to Katsuki. She called him a good child. Recovery Girl advised Katsuki to take the boy out to pleasant places to help him adjust to society and create positive memories that could ease his fears. She recommended patience and steady exposure. With time he should recover more of himself and his past. Katsuki agreed, hoping her advice would help. By 11 o'clock, everyone else had returned to their duties and the house quieted until only Katsuki and the boy remained on the sofa. Katsuki called the boy's attention and told him it was time to apply the treatment. The freckled boy looked up at the blonde and prepared to follow his lead. In his hand Katsuki held the spray and on the table sat the cream. He stood so the freckled boy could stretch his legs along the couch and make it easier to tend to them. Recovery Girl would have done it before, but Deku had begun to cry, so they had agreed that once everyone left, the blonde would apply the treatment to avoid making him uncomfortable. Deku trembled. He remembered how much the spray had stung like alcohol the day before, and the thought of that burn frightened him. Katsuki noticed the way the boy watched the bottle and told Deku not to be afraid, insisting it would only be for a moment and then it would stop hurting. Deku offered his hand nervously. Katsuki entwined their fingers, and Deku blushed. Katsuki promised bluntly that from then on he would be with Deku and protect him. Those words reached the core of Deku's heart, filling him with hope until he could no longer hold back his tears. Katsuki found himself quietly warm at the sight of Deku's smile and the brightness in his eyes. They looked at each other, searching each other's faces, finding nothing but kindness. Deku squeezed their joined hands and, after a long silence, managed to say the single word that had been on his lips for a long time: Kaken. Everything happened so quickly. Deku's sudden blush stunned Katsuki for a moment. The tight hold on their hands captured his attention completely as he watched Deku carefully, surprised by how loudly his own heart was pounding. He did not know what the strange word meant, but hearing it made him inexplicably happy. Katsuki, still a bit surprised, asked Deku what he had said. Deku repeated Kaken, this time softer. Katsuki laughed and asked what Kaken meant, half amused and half curious. Then he remembered he still hadn't applied the medicine. He scolded Deku to stop distracting him and got the spray bottle ready. After a few more tears and complaints, Katsuki finished applying the spray to all of Deku's scrapes and bruises. The spot on Deku's head had hurt the most. Once the spray was done, Katsuki told him it was time for the cream and that it would feel better. Deku nodded, still a little frightened from the sting. Katsuki spread the cooling cream over the smaller boy's injuries, keeping his focus on finishing the treatment calmly and carefully. Deku's breathing settled as the discomfort eased. When the application was complete, Katsuki changed the subject to see if Deku was hungry. Deku nodded. When Katsuki asked if he wanted anything in particular, Deku tried to speak but struggled at first, then stammered and finally managed to say Katsudon. Katsuki was surprised and pleased that Deku had managed to say two different words. He decided to make katsudon for him and joked that he was only doing it because he liked to cook. Deku watched the bowl eagerly, and when Katsuki set the katsudon in front of him, he dug in without hesitation. It was the most delicious katsudon Deku had ever tasted. His expression and the small tear that escaped showed how much he enjoyed it. Seeing Deku so satisfied made Katsuki quietly proud. When they finished eating, Katsuki noticed that Deku's clothes hung loosely on him, the sleeves slipping off his shoulders and making him look small and innocent. Katsuki cleared his throat to get Deku's attention. Deku looked up, a little flustered, waiting to see what Katsuki would say next. Katsuki asked if Deku could walk now. The freckled boy tried to stand from the dining chair and managed it, though he wobbled at first. He was able to take steady steps, and everyone felt relieved he was recovering faster than they had expected. He stumbled and sat. Hard when his legs failed, but he was certain he would be able to walk with fewer problems soon. Katsuki told Deku to get ready because they were going shopping. The idea cheered the freckled boy. Anyone would look forward to shopping, especially when others were buying things for them. For Deku, though, a crowded place was frightening, and they were headed straight to one of the busiest spots. Katsuki noticed Deku's worry and reassured him that he would be there and that would be enough for Deku to feel safe. Deku believed him. Katsuki would protect him. A red 2019 Honda took them to the shops. Kaminari drove, but his behavior was odd. He babbled and kept taking rough snapshots. Katsuki scolded him and warned him to drive carefully, threatening to punch him if he messed up. Kaminari ignored him and took a photo of the two anyway. After that, the drive remained calm. Otherwise, Kaminari might not have lived to see the end of the trip. Deku walked slowly through the crowds, and Katsuki began to feel impatient, wondering if bringing him had been a mistake. Katsuki offered to let him rest, but Deku refused, not wanting to be a burden, and pushed himself a little further. Whenever people passed close to Deku, he would hide behind Katsuki, and Katsuki found it endearingly adorable. He felt a fierce urge to keep Deku hidden from everyone, though he kept that thought to himself. They bought all kinds of clothes for Deku: pajamas, casual wear, party outfits, underwear, shoes, and more. Just as they were ready to leave, Deku stopped to look at the window of a superhero store. Katsuki watched Deku's face light up with wonder. Katsuki asked if Deku wanted the item in the window. Deku nodded shyly. Katsuki told him to take it, and Deku brightened and hurried into the store, clearly delighted. Katsuki muttered that Deku was quite pampered. That night, Katsuki fell asleep quickly in his room, worn out from the day's walking. Deku, however, could not sleep. He took his small All Might plush and quietly slipped into Katsuki's room. Carefully, he lay down on Katsuki's bed and hoped not to wake him. Katsuki, half asleep, asked what Deku was doing. Deku clutched Katsuki's shirt and looked up. Katsuki understood from his expression and actions. He told him to just sleep and gently ruffled Deku's curly hair. Deku thought that Katsuki's hands were warm. Deku settled in and took Katsuki's hand. Katsuki accepted without hesitation, allowing Deku to fall asleep if his nerves would permit it. It was only the second time they had shared a bed. Neither knew if there would be more, but both wanted it. One wanted to protect someone so vulnerable and stay by his side. The other wanted to be held by the person who made him feel safe and hopeful. Without quite realizing it, they were overflowing with care for each other. There was not a single corner that did not show signs of that cruel presence. The small room bore the marks of a violent struggle, and he could feel in his bones that it might be his turn. He did not want to end up like the others. His mind was in chaos and he had been badly mistreated by those people. The door opened and a menacing man appeared, his hands and face stained. The boy wondered if the man had already harmed someone else and feared it was now his turn. As the man advanced, the boy backed away until he hit the wall. Izuku begged the intruder not to come closer, but the pleas were ignored. The man smiled grotesquely and fixed his wide, unblinking eyes on Izuku, announcing that it was time to play. Izuku woke with a panicked scream, gasping and trembling with tears in his eyes. Katsuki woke up surprised and alarmed to find Izuku shouting about hands and crying uncontrollably, calling out that the danger was here. Katsuki did not know what to do. Izuku was falling apart, pulling at his own hair and hurting himself. Katsuki grabbed Izuku's arms to stop him from hurting himself and tried to reassure him that it had only been a nightmare and everything was all right. Izuku demanded to be let go, terrified and convinced that someone or something was watching them. Katsuki wrapped his arms around Izuku, stroking his back and hair, trying to soothe him. Katsuki told Izuku that there was no one there and that it was only the two of them. Izuku clung to the embrace, soaking Katsuki's chest with tears. Katsuki promised to stay with him and wiped away Izuku's tears with gentle hands. They slept holding each other until late the next morning. Over the following days, Izuku improved considerably, but by the third day he still trembled at small things. Unlike before, he wanted to stay close to Katsuki constantly and would take his hand whenever he could. 2 days passed with this new routine. Although Katsuki wanted to get Izuku out of the house, Izuku quickly refused and began to cry at the thought of leaving, so Katsuki decided to stay at home until Izuku felt better. When Katsuki asked what Izuku wanted, Izuku shyly asked for a hug. Katsuki smiled and laughed softly, and Izuku blushed and turned his face away. Izuku moved closer and reached his arms out. Obediently, Izuku crossed the remaining space on the couch and drew Katsuki into a strong, comforting embrace. Katsuki inhaled the familiar scent and felt a mixture of warmth and fondness. He rested his forehead gently against Izuku's and let out a light laugh, filling the quiet moment with a soft, steadying presence. They broke the hug and examined each other's faces, taking in the freckles and the worried frown. Both felt nervous at the closeness, but neither disliked it. They found themselves staring at the same point, each other's lips. Katsuki closed the distance with a sudden, impulsive movement, but they both froze before anything more happened. Instead of anything XPLCT, they shared a tender, awkward moment full of meaning and NTMT silence and a shy, mutual understanding until the doorbell interrupted them. Katsuki muttered in irritation at the interruption and rose from the couch to answer the door. He found Eijiro Kirishima standing there with his usual friendly grin. Kirishima had already stepped inside before Katsuki could close the door. Izuku peeked out, unsettled by the surprise guest, but when he saw Katsuki being playfully hugged by Kirishima, his fear ebbed for a moment. He approached and took Katsuki's arm to pull him gently away from Kirishima, wrapping himself protectively against Katsuki's side. Izuku asked Kirishima not to hug Katsuki like that. Kirishima apologized quickly, embarrassed and trying to suppress a laugh, and promised not to do it again. He then nudged Katsuki toward the television so they could relax together. Katsuki felt embarrassed and oddly pleased to see Izuku jealous. It was a new and surprising feeling. He glanced at Izuku across the room when Kirishima said that Shoto Todoroki wanted to meet with Katsuki to discuss a friendship agreement between their organizations. Kirishima explained that Todoroki had asked if they could meet next Tuesday at his company to talk things over calmly. Katsuki agreed and sighed, turning his attention back to Izuku from across the room. Kirishima told Bakugo that by then Deku would be able to be around many people. Bakugo asked how he knew, and Kirishima replied that he had already approached Deku and had a solution to take away that fear. Kirishima then left. After Kirishima left, the explosive boy worked for several hours in his home office, writing down phone numbers and prices. The office door was knocked, and Bakugo knew who it was. Deku entered, freckled and carrying a plate with 3 slices of pizza. Deku offered the pizza, and Bakugo told him to bring it to the table. Bakugo placed the plate on his desk and watched Deku's expressions as he worked, noticing how calm and serene Deku seemed. That tranquility caught Bakugo's attention. Bakugo felt observed and, without another word, took Deku's hand and led him to the TV room. Deku was happily pulled along, wondering what would happen next. They sat on the couch, Deku waiting for Bakugo to continue. Bakugo took Deku's hands, looked him in the eyes, and told him that he needed Deku to accompany him on a trip and that he wanted Deku by his side. Deku felt nervous about going alone on a trip with Bakugo. The idea sounded wonderful, but remembering crowds and the possibility of being hurt brought his fear back. Bakugo reassured Deku that he should not be afraid, insisting that he would not allow anyone to harm him and that they would be there for each other. Bakugo demanded that Deku understand. Deku nodded, squeezed Bakugo's hands, and looked into his eyes. Deku thanked Bakugo and smiled in a way that showed no trace of fear, which filled Bakugo with visible happiness. They shared a brief, affectionate embrace to mark the promise. Throwing himself toward the freckled boy was the only impulse that came to the blonde's mind. The boy was irresistibly adorable, but the blonde pulled back, reminding himself that the freckled boy was only 16 and needed care, not pressure. He stepped away and watched the younger boy remain stunned and confused, then gradually smile shyly. Katsuki averted his gaze to stop himself from rushing back. He told himself to stay calm and to be responsible. Katsuki snapped that Deku was making him crazy, then stood up from the couch and headed for the kitchen, asking what the other wanted to eat. Deku stammered Katsuki's name in surprise, then flushed from head to toe and flailed his hands before correcting himself and shouting that he meant Katsudon, finally covering his face in embarrassment. Katsuki ordered him to be quiet and stormed into the kitchen, thinking that teasing the boy would be amusing. He searched the pantry and refrigerator for ingredients to make the younger boy's favorite Katsudon, but realized they were missing too many items. He called for Deku to get ready and said they would eat out that day. Upon hearing this, the freckled boy went to his room to pick out clothes. He did not want to go, but the blonde's promise that he would protect him gave him confidence. He chose a pair of blue shorts and a green shirt with the words he loved, plus ultra. He looked through the shoes the blonde had bought for him until a pair of bright red sneakers caught his eye. It felt like love at first sight. He slipped them on and grew excited. They reminded him of something from his past he could not fully remember, only fragments that haunted his dreams. They searched half the city for a Katsudon restaurant without success and finally decided on a 5-star place that suited Katsuki's tastes. The manager had no choice but to accept them when he realized who Katsuki was. Dinner was calm, the tables were well spaced and there was a beautiful view of the sea. It was getting late from the time spent searching, and the sunset painted the horizon. The sight stirred emotions in the freckled boy. Katsuki watched him with a soft expression. The blonde found something about the moment that felt more beautiful than the sunset itself. Deku turned toward Katsuki with watery eyes. Katsuki asked why he was crying, and Deku nodded toward the view, saying it was beautiful. Katsuki sighed and told him that he was the reason the evening felt special. After they finished dinner, they returned home to pack for a trip the younger boy did not know the destination of. The freckled boy made a list to make sure he brought everything: clothes, shoes, a toothbrush, a small All-Might plush, a comb, his spray, a comforting cream, and his bandages. He packed all he had. He was nervous and excited. It would be his first trip with the explosive blonde. He wondered what they would do, his imagination running wild because the blonde refused to tell him the destination, calling it a surprise. Later that night, after packing, both were exhausted. They showered and prepared to sleep in Katsuki's room. The freckled boy hesitated, then asked if it was okay to keep sleeping beside him. Katsuki frowned and asked why he would say that, then reassured him that he did not mind. Deku worried he was noisy and would keep him awake, but Katsuki noticed that Deku was no longer staying silent and waved him over, offering his hand. Deku accepted and was pulled into a hug. He felt safe in those strong arms and grew more fond of the blonde who watched over him. They slept close to each other, Deku with his face tucked near Katsuki's chest while Katsuki found comfort in the warmth and the quiet breath of the other. The next morning, Katsuki prepared breakfast: cheese and green chili-filled omelets with cream. Deku insisted on helping, so Katsuki set him to make the strawberry smoothie the blonde liked. Although Deku's mother had always made it, he tried his best and succeeded. They ate together on their favorite couch while watching television. Katsuki grumbled about the program Deku liked, and Deku defended the hero fervently, smiling and laughing in a gentle, affectionate way that embarrassed Katsuki. Katsuki turned away in typical fashion, asking how many more times the younger boy would make him feel this way. Muttered under his breath about Deku as they continued their quiet morning. They loaded their bags into Katsuki's black sports car. Kaminari checked the tires while informing them someone else would take a different car and that Kirishima would ride with Zero. Katsuki declared he would drive that day. Kaminari cheered, saying it felt like the old times, and Katsuki agreed. He told the others that the younger kids could sit in the back, which made Deku nervous. Katsuki corrected that he needed someone to drive the yellow car, where the rest of the luggage was packed. Deku protested that he had wanted to go with them, and the group shared a brief, playful exchange before they all climbed into their vehicles and set off for the trip. He laughed, but his surprise came when the blonde raised the blinds and Deku realized that the other had seen his blush. In that instant Deku felt certain that the possibility he had hoped for might finally come true. Deku had already taken his last belongings and climbed into the front seat beside the ash blonde, while Denki rode in the yellow car. They were heading to Bakugu's favorite place for their group of friends. Deku felt a little embarrassed and admitted to Bakugu that he had not known the others would be coming. Bakugu answered without taking his eyes off the road that there was no problem, and reassured him that those idiots were good people, if a bit meddlesome. Deku responded unsurely, still nervous. The drive was long, about 3 hours, until they arrived at a large house facing the beach, a typical, beautiful place with pleasant sunshine. Bakugu told Deku that it was one of his houses and that he wanted him to see them all. Deku, flustered and excited, stammered a yes, which made Bakugu laugh. They stepped out of the car and carried their bags. Deku stood breathless, taking in the view. The two-story house was surrounded by palm trees with hammocks hanging between them, and the sea was only a few minutes' walk away. Inside, Bakugu led Deku as they began to unpack their things. Bakugu helped carry one of Deku's bags up to the second floor where they would sleep. Bakugu told Deku that they would sleep in that room together, which at first made Deku think they would share beds. When he saw 2 beds, Deku felt slightly disappointed, but Bakugu teased him, suggesting they could share one. Deku turned bright red, and Bakugu's amusement grew at how adorable he found him. They shared a quiet, heartfelt moment, exchanging shy smiles and a certain closeness. Then Bakugu pulled back in his usual brusque way. Before anything else could happen, the door to the room slammed open unexpectedly. Ijiro Kirishima's voice called out from the hallway, announcing loudly in typical fashion. Bakugu, startled, apologized quickly and closed the door, then rushed out after the others. Bakugu barreled down the stairs like a wild thing, searching the house until he found Kirishima and Denki in the kitchen. Kirishima was speaking quickly and cheerfully about something, And Denki was equally excited, practically bouncing with energy. When Bakugo arrived, shouting an insult in his usual blunt style, the other two ran out of the house laughing and headed for the water to hide. Elsewhere in the house, Shiro placed a guitar in the corner and told Bakugo that he had brought what was requested. Shiro lowered his voice and warned that he wanted Bakugo to take the others out that afternoon and that everything had to go perfectly. Bakugo pushed Shiro jokingly on his way out and went to find his shorter friend. Back upstairs, Deku was organizing his things in a drawer and paused, leaning against the wall to watch Bakugo, who looked focused and a little unsteady about where to put socks. Bakugo called down to Deku and told him to come downstairs when he finished because they would make hot dogs, and not to take too long. Deku, excited and nervous, replied that he would hurry. The weather was perfect. The wind felt delicious on their faces and seagulls glided freely on the breeze. 2 years later, the tragic incident that had kept the 4 young men from attending the awards ceremony remained a wound. The once celebratory moment had become a horrifying memory. Papers and case files about the 4 missing people lay scattered across a table while a middle-aged man read through them again, searching for any clue. Time had passed, and they still had nothing on the killer. They had recovered only limited remains connected to one of the victims, and that discovery had devastated the victim's family, but beyond that there was nothing. The public knew nothing of the details, only family members, detectives, and the police were aware. The man rubbed his tired eyes and allowed himself one last attempt to find an answer. After that, he would have to accept what everyone else seemed to be saying, that they were gone. Back at the beach house, the same scene from before repeated in small, harmless ways. Kirishima's shout at the door reopened the moment, and Bakugo rushed out, scanning the halls until he found the group together near the kitchen. Kirishima and Denki were still talking excitedly. Bakugo's sudden arrival caused the others to bolt for the shore once more, laughing and teasing as they ran. Shiro reappeared with the guitar and announced he had brought it as requested. He lowered his voice and reminded Bakugo that the plan for that afternoon needed to go flawlessly, and Bakugo laughed, recalling what Denki had told him earlier about the rumor that had started it all. Before leaving, Bakugo gave Shiro a shove and then went to be with his close friend. Deku continued arranging his things and then joined the others when called. The group set about enjoying the day, their friendship noisy and familiar against the backdrop of the sea and the warm wind. Katsuki cleaned the grill while Shiro set up a table and chairs. A few friends had come to help, but their attempts to light the charcoal were clumsy enough to test Katsuki's patience. Deku arranged the plates and glasses on the table, then sat down with a book while waiting for the sausages. Denki approached intending to tease him with questions, but his excitement shifted when he noticed what Deku was reading. Denki excitedly asked if the book was the new All Might comic and immediately asked what he thought of the battle between One for All and All for One. Deku answered nervously that the battle had been incredible and that All Might had saved hundreds of people in minutes. Denki's enthusiasm proved contagious. And they spent the rest of the afternoon talking about comics, quickly earning Deku's trust. When the hot dogs were ready, everyone began to eat. The others opened beers and wine and enjoyed the view of the sea, but Katsuki refused to drink so he could watch over Deku. Of course, Deku did not drink either. Frustrated that Deku had been so absorbed by the conversation with Denki, Katsuki muttered at the group that they were idiots. Kirishima watched the scene and commented that they were adorable and masculine. A laugh from a redhead followed and someone else shot back a retort. As the sun started to set, Shiro put the original plan into motion and announced they were going fishing, grabbing Kirishima and Denki and dragging them off toward the shoreline. Katsuki and Deku stayed behind and looked at each other. Deku asked if they could build a bonfire, and Katsuki replied that he would love that. Katsuki had already brought dry wood just in case. Katsuki's house sat about 15 meters from the sea, with a cement staircase leading down to the sand. The place was private and mostly quiet aside from a few distant neighbors. They set the fire 8 meters from the water and arranged logs around it to sit on. Deku asked why Katsuki had brought a guitar. Katsuki said he would play a little and that he would sing only for Deku. Deku grew excited at the thought and watched him with wide eyes. Katsuki played, and the music filled the evening. He sang about remembering a day vividly, about someone who meant everything, about a gaze that stayed with him and the small jealousies that proved how much that person mattered. He promised to care for that person through the nights, to love without reproach, and to miss them through storms and solitude. His voice carried over the water and the colors of the sky seemed to lean in to listen. Deku listened, his emotions swelling until tears came unbidden. When the song ended, neither of them looked away. Deku was overcome and found himself speaking first. Deku told Katsuki that he loved him too. They paused, both breathing in the quiet after the music, sharing a short, tender moment of closeness and happiness. They had known each other only a short time, but their feelings felt as old as memories. For Katsuki, anything that had started as something practical, the campaign for student council, mattered far less than the desire to stay by Deku's side and build a life of memories together. Sometimes one had to fight for what was most wanted, regardless of how right or wrong it felt to others. Would you do anything to be with the person you love? Everything had felt like a sweet dream that no one wanted to wake from. Everything seemed happiness, fantasy, and above all, love. The weekend passed too quickly for the two young men, who had enjoyed the incredible views at every hour of the day, dawn, dusk, and night. They spent their time gazing at each other, and when no one was watching they shared private moments and small displays of affection, stole away when they could, and held hands. Katsuki thought the plan had gone perfectly. Deku could already be with his friends without any problems, especially with Kaminari nearby, and that had been one of the biggest steps forward for the freckled boy in making friends despite his emotional uncertainty. The weekend had flown by, everyone had enjoyed it and hoped it would happen again someday. They packed their bags and instruments they had used over the weekend. Everyone climbed into their cars as they had arrived, except Kirishima, who preferred to ride with Kaminari so he would not have to go back alone, which made Kaminari smile. On the way back they stopped at a small convenience store to stock up on snacks for the long drive. The ashy blonde told Deku to take whatever he wanted while grabbing a large bag of spicy chips and a 600-milliliter cola. Deku thanked him and wandered the aisles, hesitating until he found a pack of sugar donuts that reminded him of the first thing the blonde had bought for him. He took the donuts and picked up a lemon iced tea as well. He announced to Katsuki that he was ready. Katsuki commented that it was about time, looking Deku over and provoking a nervous blush from the smaller boy. The drive was calm and quiet. Deku opened his window to feel the wind toss his hair and sting his eyes, and when small tears formed he closed them and simply enjoyed the cool air on his face. Katsuki watched every small reaction. It had become normal for him to notice everything about Deku, no matter how insignificant. He liked him so much that he could not stop looking. Deku was simply endearing. Katsuki was distracted and nearly hit a squirrel, forcing him to brake hard and scaring Deku. Deku reached out worriedly and took Katsuki's hand. Katsuki cursed at the squirrel and thumped the steering wheel in irritation. Deku smiled with relief and said the important thing was that Katsuki was all right. Katsuki pulled the car safely to the side of the road and took a moment to steady himself and comfort Deku after the scare. Deku pulled back and asked for a little more space because he was feeling overwhelmed. Katsuki's teasing grin only made Deku flush more, and the teasing between them remained playful and familiar. Deku pushed at Katsuki and insisted they go on, and Katsuki laughed and indulged the situation. Deku turned his gaze away for the rest of the drive, embarrassed and still shaken by the scare. He fell asleep halfway home and slept through the rest of the trip. Later, while asleep, Deku dreamed of something terrifying, shadows threatening to harm 3 people. The dream showed a menacing figure asking in a cold, mechanical voice who should be targeted first and telling Deku that he would leave one person's hands intact for the other. The 3 young figures in the dream panicked and cried for mercy. The fear and helplessness felt all too real, and Deku woke with his heart racing. Katsuki's eyes met Deku's as he woke. Katsuki reassured him that it had only been another bad dream as he unfastened Deku's seatbelt. Deku held onto Katsuki while Katsuki ruffled his hair to comfort him. When Deku asked to be carried, Katsuki teased him about not having legs, then gave in with a mock scowl. Katsuki lifted Deku into his arms, and Deku snuggled closer. Katsuki searched his pockets for the keys with Deku clinging to his side and finally found them in a back pocket. He opened the front door, walking quickly to avoid tripping with Deku in his arms. They both looked exhausted. Katsuki moved with zombie-like determination. Once in the bedroom, Katsuki tossed Deku onto the bed as he had intended to set him down. Too tired to move further, Deku settled on top of Katsuki, and both of them fell asleep where they lay. Monday arrived. Katsuki reviewed important documents at his desk, going over Todoroki's company's proposal with a mixture of reluctant admiration and irritation. He hated admitting that Todoroki had come up with a good idea. He left his desk to get a snack in the kitchen and found Deku cooking while wearing an All Might apron. Katsuki was surprised, since he did not remember buying it. Katsuki frowned in annoyance and complained that Kaminari had given it to him and that it was not the same. Izuku looked at a bag of rice and a bit of spilled soy sauce on the table and asked what was happening. Izuku replied cheerfully that he would make fried rice. Katsuki teased that it would end up burnt, wiping the smile from Izuku's face, then regretted his comment. Katsuki admitted he had wanted to make a meal for Izuku to enjoy together. Izuku lowered his gaze and began to play nervously with his fingers. Katsuki insisted he had been joking, gently ruffled Izuku's hair, and gave a short, affectionate peck on his forehead, saying he would be happy to eat the meal from his partner. Izuku frowned and pouted, insisting that he was not a girl. Katsuki laughed and teased him, then warned that the rice was burning. Despite the rice being slightly overcooked, it tasted acceptable. They ate quietly, holding hands across the table. Katsuki stroked Izuku's hand as they ate, glancing at each other and smiling like they always did. Tuesday arrived sooner than expected. Katsuki helped Izuku with his tie because he had it on incorrectly. This time both of them would go to Katsuki's workplace. The blonde wanted to show Izuku his job and planned to test how Izuku handled crowded situations. Katsuki called for Kaminari, who arrived in a few minutes. Izuku was a little nervous but steadier than before. They climbed into the back seats of a sleek, electric blue car. Kaminari teased them about the handsome couple, and Katsuki growled in response. Izuku thanked Kaminari enthusiastically for the apron he had given him. Kaminari said he would give him all the things related to All Might that he could. Katsuki snapped that he could buy whatever he wanted and warned Kaminari not to be so loud next time, teasing that he almost woke Izuku before. Kaminari apologized playfully and backed off, which made Katsuki sigh but let the joke pass. Izuku seemed calmer than usual. He only became flustered when surprised. Everything was going well, and Katsuki felt proud of him. They arrived at Katsuki's large office building and were greeted cheerfully by Eijiro Kirishima. Kirishima greeted them by name and asked about Izuku. Izuku told Kirishima to call him Izuku, gently correcting him. Katsuki reacted with shock that Izuku had not told him sooner what name he preferred, and his temper flared. He demanded loudly when Izuku had planned to tell him and accused Izuku of telling Kirishima first. Kirishima raised his arms and tried to calm them down. Todoroki arrived at that moment, and the bicolored young man took in the scene. His gaze landed on Izuku and he called his name in disbelief. The sight felt unexpectedly familiar to Todoroki. Earlier that day, Todoroki and Izuku had been at a pleasant restaurant on the outskirts of Los Angeles, enjoying a cool, cloudy day. They had brought umbrellas because it looked like it might rain. Todoroki asked if Izuku's father would be receiving an award that day. Izuku answered that his father had asked him to present the award and that it was incredible. Todoroki asked if Izuku's father would attend. Izuku explained that his own father did not want anything to do with Toshinori and only wanted to surpass him. Todoroki listened and said he was glad for him. Izuku then mentioned that he might not arrive at the exact time because of some documents his father would send. Todoroki reassured him that it was fine and offered to take care of things. Izuku asked if Todoroki could bring a few friends along, listing names, and Todoroki agreed with a smile that, in that moment, gave Izuku confidence. In a quiet thought, Todoroki reflected that he had thought of Izuku as a friend, but a darker thought crept in. You cannot trust anyone. Back in the office, Todoroki's expression suddenly turned shadowed. He lashed out verbally at Izuku, shouting that Izuku had killed Momo and calling him an assassin. He ran toward the group with clear intent to hurt someone. Katsuki reacted with surprise and immediately stepped in front of Izuku to protect him. Izuku was terrified, trembling and crying like a helpless child. Todoroki accused him again, saying he had trusted Izuku, and pushed forward, determined to make him pay. Kirishima moved quickly and grabbed Todoroki's arms, holding him tightly. Kirishima shouted that Todoroki was mistaken and tried to calm the brawl. He argued that even if something had happened in the past, it did not define who Izuku was now. The struggle ended with Todoroki collapsing to the floor, unconscious from Kirishima's intervention. Kirishima commented on Todoroki's strength with a wry remark. Katsuki hugged Izuku in relief and asked if he was okay. Izuku, shaken and confused, asked if he was a murderer. Katsuki reassured him emphatically that he was not and called him simply his Izuku. Katsuki stroked Izuku's curly hair and promised he would investigate the matter. He told Izuku not to worry and said he would call Kaminari to take Izuku home while he would speak with the others and get to the bottom of the situation. The boy nodded and hugged him again. Izuku told Katsuki that he loved him, and Katsuki returned the sentiment. Denki Kaminari took Izuku to the older student's house. Although Izuku did not want to leave Katsuki alone, he complied without protest. Denki asked Katsuki what they should do about Todoroki. Katsuki said they should wait for him to wake and helped settle Todoroki into a seat. Denki watched the two-colored student and asked if Izuku could be trusted, worried that this might be some trick. Katsuki reassured him that Izuku was completely different. Eijiro Kirishima, visibly concerned, asked what would happen if Todoroki remembered everything. Katsuki slammed his temper down and told Kirishima to be quiet, insisting again that Todoroki was not like that. For a moment Katsuki admitted Kirishima might be right, but he would trust Izuku first. They waited for half an hour. Todoroki finally woke, dizzy with a splitting headache and holding his head. Katsuki offered him a glass of water. Todoroki demanded to know where Midoriya was and stood abruptly, ignoring Kirishima. Katsuki, trying to keep the situation calm, told Todoroki that he understood he needed answers and suggested they talk civilly without losing control. Todoroki insisted, agitated, asking loudly what had happened to Midoriya and demanding to know who had taken him. Bakugo mocked him and, with a smirk, corrected Todoroki by saying the person he saw with them was Bakugo Izuku. Todoroki furiously accused that boy of killing his fiancée. A gray-haired blonde man shot back angrily, asking how Todoroki could be so certain and whether he had been there, while Kirishima watched in stunned silence as if watching a movie. Todoroki said he had not been there but had a video that showed everything, and he prepared to show it. Katsuki and the others were speechless. Katsuki wanted to prove that Izuku was a good person. He was sure his freckled younger teammate would never hurt anyone. Facing Todoroki's accusations and the claim of evidence, Katsuki told him to show the video. Izuku prepared for the big expo where his father, Yagi Toshinori, would be honored. He was excited not only to see his father's new car designs but also to spend time with family and friends he had not seen in a long time. Izuku greeted Tenya Ida and asked if he was ready. Ida replied that he had been waiting so they should not be late. Their chauffeur parked in front of a large mansion, a little smaller than Izuku's home. A hurried boy with black hair came out of the house and climbed into the car. Ida buckled his seatbelt and asked if they should pick up the other girls. Izuku confirmed that they were also going to pick up a friend only he knew. They arrived at the home of a modest but brilliant young inventor. Her determination had taken her far in new technology. She dreamed of improving her family's circumstances and was working on futuristic cars that could one day fly. The girl, Achiko Uraraka, warmly greeted them. Uraraka, Ida, and Izuku rode together in the same car that night. Todoroki and Momo Yaoyorozu were 2 years older than Izuku and the others. At Momo's mansion she came out happily to greet them. The group complimented each other before moving on. The last house they visited looked large but neglected, as if it had been empty for a long time. Everyone turned to Izuku, since the place gave them an uneasy feeling and he had mentioned that their friend might be there. Concerned that Izuku was taking too long, Ida urged haste, and the chauffeur suggested that Izuku should go fetch his friend since he had invited him. Momo, worried by the house's shabby appearance, agreed and they all set off together. Izuku told the chauffeur, named Dabi, that they would be back soon. Dabi said quietly that he would wait as long as it took, and he smiled in a way that made the group uneasy. On the drive to Katsuki's house, Denki talked casually with Izuku. He asked how Katsuki treated him. Izuku said that Katsuki was kind to him and that they sometimes watched All Might together, though Katsuki pretended not to like it and would get more excited than Izuku during the fights. Denki laughed and agreed that those moments were epic. He asked if Katsuki made breakfast and Izuku explained that they sometimes ate out, especially at lunch or dinner. When Denki asked if they slept together, Izuku, embarrassed, admitted that they sometimes shared a bed. Denki considered asking more, but noticing Izuku's discomfort he stopped and changed the subject. Denki called the younger boy by his given name and admired it. Izuku, a little embarrassed, confirmed that his name was Izuku. He shrugged that his dreams sometimes gave him strange impressions, and nothing new had been revealed to him lately. Kaminari and Izuku arrived at the blonde's house to face the accusations and the evidence Todoroki claimed to have. They had just arrived at Katsuki Bakugu's house. The car parked in front of the large home to drop off the freckled boy. Izuku Midoriya stepped out and thanked Denki Kaminari. Kaminari insisted it was his job and that he would wait there, and Izuku, nervous and awkward, tried to reassure him that he would be fine. Kaminari reminded him that he should go pick up Kaken and cautioned that Kaken might be angry if anyone was late. Kaminari felt disappointed at having extra time before collecting the explosive blonde, but he could tell that Izuku wanted to be alone and decided to give him space. Katsuki Bakugu wanted proof, and he would not accuse his freckled partner without concrete evidence. He was afraid especially because Shoto Todoroki claimed to have a video but he was convinced it was a misunderstanding and resolved to see for himself. Todoroki drove them to his home determined to prove that Midoriya had killed his fiancée. His eyes were filled with anger as he thought about what he believed had happened. The car stopped at Todoroki's mansion, a beautiful traditional house that, despite its classical appearance, was modern and luxurious inside. Shoto stepped out briskly, expression unreadable, and Katsuki followed behind. Shoto opened the door to his house, impatient and desperate to show what he had. Katsuki watched every reaction in Todoroki and could tell the boy had not been sleeping. His mind seemed always elsewhere. Katsuki felt sorry for him, he looked so broken yet he did not flinch. His own mother would have intimidated him far more than any of this. They entered a room that felt like an office. Todoroki invited Katsuki to sit while he searched for the video. Katsuki let out a frustrated sound but sat reluctantly in one of the comfortable chairs, wanting the ordeal to be over. Todoroki moved quickly through folders on his computer, typing patterns and passwords in a way that made it hard for Katsuki to follow. Todoroki asked Katsuki to pay attention and then played the footage. The recording showed a cold, cluttered place filled with boxes and scattered objects. 3 chairs were visible, each occupied by someone bound to it. The faces of the captives were clearly seen: a brown-haired woman, a black-haired woman, and a black-haired man, all unconscious and bearing injuries, though nothing graphic was shown. The scene shifted and the camera turned toward a disturbing figure who smiled with a frightening calm as he gripped a small boy trying to move toward the others. The sight that stopped Katsuki cold was the freckled boy Midoriya among those captives. Todoroki had not lied, and Katsuki's mind raced. What was Izuku doing there? The footage focused on the man holding Midoriya. The man spoke in a cold, manipulative way, asking if the boy had made a decision. Midoriya answered weakly and, under clear duress, pointed toward the black-haired woman, indicating she should be harmed. A blonde woman then appeared and performed a cruel, unspecified act before handing something to the terrifying man, who still held Midoriya. The clip ended abruptly. It was short and clearly edited, leaving many questions unanswered. Todoroki pressed that Katsuki now knew the truth and that someone had to pay. Katsuki argued that the footage did not tell the whole story and that Midoriya had seemed forced and terrified. His expression had betrayed that. Todoroki countered with bitterness. The video had arrived to him in the mail a year after the woman's disappearance, accompanied by evidence that confirmed what the footage suggested. He described how terrified he had felt then, how helpless, and how Midoriya had made a choice when Todoroki had entrusted that woman to his care. Todoroki's voice cracked with pain and anger, and tears tracked down his face. Katsuki insisted they could not blame Midoriya on the basis of this alone and that they would need more evidence. He was sure no clear proof existed beyond the edited clip. Unable to stay and watch Todoroki's anguish any longer, Katsuki left quickly, a tightness forming in his throat. Seeing Todoroki so devastated had set his mind racing with worst-case scenarios above all, worries for Izuku, who must have suffered more than anyone. He ran until night had fallen without him noticing the time. He wanted to get away from the house and into the safety of Midoriya's arms. He called Kaminari, and to his surprise Denki and the blonde driver arrived within a minute. Katsuki climbed into the car and turned to Denki, surprised to find him so close. Katsuki asked whether Denki had been with Midoriya, and Denki explained that Midoriya had asked him to leave early so he could come pick up Katsuki. Alarmed, Katsuki urged haste. If Midoriya began to remember fragments of the past, it could be dangerous, and Katsuki did not know what the freckled boy might do. Denki noticed the warning in Katsuki's eyes and accelerated, and both of them felt the same cold sense that something very bad was happening. Everything happened too fast to be true. No one thought it would be too late when they returned, and he was sure nothing would be the same again. It had started like a fairy tale and a romantic comedy film, one of his favorites. The past can be forgotten but never erased. It will always be there to haunt the present. If only he had arrived earlier. The ash blonde regretted having come late. In his house there was no sign of him, only a door left open with no indication it would be closed again. He searched desperately in every corner of the large mansion and found no trace of his partner. He ran out of the house with Denki calling frantically behind him and the others trying to reach friends for news about the green-haired boy. Katsuki shouted Deku's name with all his might, not caring about the people walking on the wide streets. He kept shouting Deku's name as he ran, hoping to find him, but his efforts were in vain. Deku was no longer there. Katsuki had not shown that kind of vulnerability since he was 7 years old. He felt as if he were back in that time, his tears running painfully down his cheeks. He never imagined he could feel something so raw. Katsuki whispered that Deku should come back and that he loved him, his voice breaking as he collapsed onto the cold floor of the last place he had searched. He fell onto the couch that held their sweetest memories. Waking up on the hard floor was the worst. His back and arms ached. He had slept on his right arm and everything felt bruised. Every small movement stung. He cursed under his breath, then angrily cursed the floor and began pounding the wall frantically. He did not notice someone approaching until the red-haired boy stepped in, hands raised to block any further outburst. Kirishima tried to calm him down, but Katsuki exploded, his face fierce and furious like an angry king. Kirishima asked why he was being treated with so much swearing and explained that Kaminari had called saying they needed help, but the green-haired boy was not there. Katsuki's voice betrayed his anguish as he admitted that Deku was still in the park. His fists tightened and his brows drew together in worry, and Kirishima suspected this was not good. He decided he would go look for him and thought about the freckled boy who was being accused of something terrible. Nothing good could be happening. Katsuki was dizzy. His brief fainting spell had lasted no more than a couple of minutes. He stole one last glance at the couch that had become a favorite since the freckled boy had once rested a hand on it. A familiar sound pulled him from those thoughts, a common household noise, but in the empty house it startled him. He grabbed the first thing at hand, a heavy suitcase that had not been unpacked since their visit to the beach house, and crept up the stairs with it held like a weapon. He reached the bathroom door and heard someone inside. He prepared to open it and strike at the intruder in his humble home, and he kicked the door open. He realized, belatedly, that the bathroom had been the last place he thought to search. What he found inside was the most horrifying scene he had encountered. Katsuki felt his mind betray him for a moment, then immediately pushed the thought away. Katsuki had accidentally seen Izuku through the bathroom glass and left right away, flustered. Izuku called for him in a shaky voice and asked him to leave, and Katsuki, worried for his younger friend, reminded Izuku that he would wait for him in the living room. He went straight to the TV room and sat on his usual couch, waiting. Kirishima and Kaminari kept searching without stopping. Kirishima, though not entirely convinced, decided to look for Izuku. He told himself that real friends don't abandon other friends. Kaminari, running to catch up, called out to Kirishima and showed him a chat on his phone. Kaminari pointed out the group's chat title, and Kirishima scrolled. The messages revealed that someone had already found Izuku and was teasing about it. One message used a teasing pet name, which made Kirishima frown when he noticed the phrasing. He laughed and said he had only said it to annoy the other person, and then reached out playfully to pinch the other's cheeks. Kirishima reacted with mock displeasure and told him he didn't like it and that only he could use that pet name. He laughed and reached up to give a quick, playful peck on the other's lips, an affectionate but innocent gesture. Back in the living room, Katsuki waited longer than usual and started to worry, but he didn't want to see Izuku upset again, so he turned on the television to pass the time. Izuku emerged from his room in dog-patterned pajamas with a small hood, a gift from Katsuki. He looked tired and sleepy as he walked into the living room at Katsuki's request. Izuku stood in front of Katsuki and apologized, crying and avoiding eye contact out of fear. Izuku confessed that he had been having nightmares about things from the past and that Todoroki had been right to be concerned. Katsuki gently told Izuku not to cry, saying that he knew Izuku had not been to blame and that people had forced him into bad situations. Katsuki quickly stood and went to Izuku, taking him into a warm, reassuring embrace. Izuku sobbed and said that he had to leave. Katsuki tightened his hold and said he would follow him and not leave him alone. He tried to comfort Izuku by placing a gentle, reassuring gesture on his forehead and speaking softly, insisting that he would stay involved and support him. Izuku protested loudly that he did not want to involve Katsuki, but Katsuki told him it was too late, he was already involved. Katsuki cupped Izuku's face and gazed at him intensely, saying that Izuku belonged with him. They shared a quiet, supportive moment that calmed Izuku, who gradually matched Katsuki's steady presence. The moment remained tender and non-explicit. Katsuki held Izuku closer, adjusting the young man's hands so they rested more comfortably, and asked him for a sign of trust. Izuku blushed and felt nervous, but he responded with a small, quick gesture of affection and innocent peck and then stepped back, breathless. Katsuki laughed softly at Izuku's reaction and then tried to be careful not to overwhelm him. He slowed down and focused on comforting Izuku rather than pushing further. Katsuki nuzzled Izuku's cheek gently and tried to soothe him with small, calming touches. Izuku experienced new emotions and reactions, each one unfamiliar but not inappropriate, and he began to grow more comfortable with Katsuki's presence. At that moment, someone called out and a friend rushed in. Katsuki started back immediately, taking Izuku's face and showing a worried expression. He thought to himself that it would be a disaster if he did anything reckless, especially given the uncertainty around Izuku's age. Katsuki prepared to step away, but Izuku grabbed his arm. Izuku, covering his face with embarrassment, then admitted softly that he was actually 18. The clarification stopped the worry, and the group adjusted to the new understanding. So many documents were driving him mad. More bad news was the last thing he needed after searching for the disappeared for 2 years. Tired of it all, he took his yellow futon and lay down to do what he loved most, sleep. Everything was interrupted when someone slammed the door. Aizawa warned that it better be a life-or-death matter. One of his colleagues, used to Aizawa's bluntness, announced that they had found 3 of the missing boys. Aizawa asked for details, and the colleague, handing over a yellow folder with photos and collected information, reported that there was only 1 survivor and that 2 of the boys had been found dead under violent circumstances. After reading, Aizawa realized that the young Midoriya, the one they were most searching for, had not been found. There were no traces of him. The freckled boy remembered being 16 when everything had happened, and he recalled that Todoroki had said the disappearances had occurred 2 years ago. The blonde approached Midoriya and asked if they could proceed, which made Midoriya blush and look away in embarrassment. Another voice noted that he had predicted they would be okay. Kirishima, usually the smiling type, looked unusually serious. He explained that they had come with important news. 3 of the students who had disappeared were now accounted for, and all of them had been important students at UA, as they once were. Todoroki had mentioned these disappearances 2 years earlier. One of the missing had still not been located, and everyone's attention turned to the smaller green-haired boy, who began to tremble. The blonde asked if this meant they would have to return to the United States, and he understood what was coming. The group confirmed that Izuku Midoriya seemed very important. Someone asked how so, and the conversation turned to Toshinori Yagi. One voice insisted that Toshinori had no children and was not married, while another explained that Toshinori had apparently adopted the boy after the child's mother had died in a car accident and he had no other family. When asked where that information came from, one of them admitted, somewhat sheepishly, that they had found it on Wikipedia. They asked Midoriya if he remembered his father. He searched his memory, uncertain, and asked if his father was the world's best car inventor. Kirishima brightened and confirmed that he was. Memories of the man who had taught him to design his own car surfaced. Someone who had made his dream feel possible, who had been kind and encouraging and deeply important to him. As those memories arrived, tears began to fall from his green eyes. Kaken wiped his tears with a thumb, and Midoriya declared that he had to see his father. They prepared for the long trip to the United States. Kirishima, Katsuki, Midoriya, and even Kaminari, who tagged along, boarded the plane. On the flight they were pleasantly surprised to find Todoroki traveling to the US as well. He had been drawn by the same news. Todoroki, seated a few rows back on the opposite side, glanced toward Midoriya now and then. He thought that Midoriya could not be guilty, that the boy had lived under a terrible deception that had led him to blame his best friend, and he resolved to apologize once they landed. The flight was calm, especially in first class with its large, comfortable seats, good food, and live instrumental music. Midoriya slept for most of the trip. Classical music always put him to sleep. Someone watched his sleeping face with concern but stopped when Todoroki gave a look from a few seats back. Bakugo muttered a frustrated insult under his breath about Todoroki and kept his anger in check. They arrived around 8 in the morning, helped in part by having slept on the plane and adjusting to the time difference. At the hotel, Bakugo demanded whether anyone had called Toshinori. The answer came that Toshinori was very busy and could not answer. They had been told to meet with his secretary instead. When they learned who the secretary was, Aizawa, a mix of reactions rippled through the group. Bakugo, in his usual blunt way, called Aizawa a nickname aloud. Denki spoke with enthusiasm about what they had found. Bakugo smirked and mocked that the old man had ended up at the company. Midoriya only watched them, puzzled and a little jealous that he did not understand their conversation. They arrived at the large BMW car company, which Bakugo liked to call the best according to fools. Everything in the building was so modern and elegant that Midoriya, the youngest of the group, felt both amazed and nostalgic. Kaminari took photos and kept whispering that it was the best car company. At the reception, an orange-haired receptionist greeted them warmly and told Bakugo that it was a pleasure to have him visit. Kirishima asked if they could see Aizawa, and the receptionist offered to call ahead. She asked them to follow her, led them into the elevator, and took them to the top floor where the senior offices were located. The receptionist instructed them to keep to the right and said that the last office ahead belonged to Aizawa. Then she left. Kirishima and Kaminari thanked her together. When they reached the office, Bakugo knocked and a voice from inside complained about the noise and invited them in. Midoriya tensed, unsure how Aizawa would react, worried that the response might be stormy like Todoroki's. They entered and found the room dark. A gruff voice told them to turn on the light. Denki switched the light on, revealing a yellow sleeping bag on the floor. Denki reacted with excited surprise. Aizawa, groggy and still wrapped in the sleeping bag, rose slowly. He looked tired and startled, then turned to face his former students and saw something he had not expected. Aizawa recognized Midoriya and, surprised, asked what he was doing there. The ash blonde explained that Midoriya remembered almost nothing. He said that when he had found him, Midoriya had not even known his own name, and only now had they learned that he was the son of the old man. Aizawa left the office without saying more, and the others followed him, confused. They walked to one of the agency cars. Aizawa climbed in and motioned for them to do the same. They obeyed. The ash blonde expressed his confusion at the situation, unable to understand what was happening. Aizawa told them they were going to see Midoriya's father. Midoriya became excited and nervous at the thought of seeing someone who might be one of the most important people in his life. He felt both scared and happy, while the ash blonde gently took his hand. Anxiety tormented Deku. He did not know how his father would react or whether his father might see him as something dangerous. His memories arrived in a jumble, each one piling onto the next until they only deepened his confusion. Katsuki noticed the boy's state and squeezed his hand more tightly. Katsuki smiled and reassured the green-haired boy that everything would be all right, using a teasing tone to try to chase away his fear. Aizawa, who had watched their interaction through the rearview mirror, was surprised for the second time that day. His usually temperamental student, the one who had once vowed never to fall for anyone, was being tender with the president's son. Aizawa had wanted to take a picture, but since he was the one behind the wheel it was impossible. As if reading the thought, Kaminari reached in and snapped several photos from different angles. Kaminari was excited and showed everyone the photos, calling them additions for his collection and proudly displaying each shot. Katsuki, oblivious to the display, leaned in and whispered something to Deku. Ijiro laughed and reminisced about all the times they had snuck into Katsuki's house without him noticing. Katsuki reacted with a furious glare and moved as if to confront them, but Aizawa put a weary hand out to calm the group and announced that they had arrived. The building was large, though not what they had expected. They all wondered why the president would be in a place like this. Everyone left the car puzzled. Katsuki asked why Yagi was there. Aizawa explained that sooner or later they would learn the truth. Yagi was here as a patient. Ijiro asked why they had not been told before. Aizawa said the situation had to be kept secret to avoid alarming the public until they found the heir. In that moment Katsuki realized that Deku could become the head of the world's largest company and that, as businesspeople, they might become rivals. Deku asked sadly if his father was sick, his spirits draining by the second. Aizawa explained that although Deku might not remember everything, his father had hidden his condition to protect Deku's studies. Only a few knew the initial situation. The older man led them toward the hospital. They followed, and along the way the sight of other patients frightened Deku even more. Katsuki held his hand and told him, with firm reassurance, that everything would be okay. Whispers spread through the hospital as people recognized Deku. They would have sworn he was the president's son, although his features were a little different now. His hair was longer, falling to his shoulders, and he had grown thinner. They reached a private wing reserved for important patients, where rooms were large and discreet. The older man informed them that only one visitor was permitted per day and gestured for Deku to go ahead. Deku trembled, afraid of what he might find. Katsuki tightened his grip on Deku's hand and asked the attendant if he could accompany him. Aizawa consented. The older man opened the door and they entered a quiet room that smelled faintly of medicine. In the center, surrounded by medical equipment, an older man lay propped up reading a magazine, looking pale and frail. When Deku shyly called for his father, the older man turned at the sound. His face crumpled with emotion and tears streamed down his cheeks as joy flooded him. He tried to sit up but lacked the strength. Deku hurried to his side and embraced his father, both of them crying together. The father laughed through his tears at how grown his son had become and expressed how relieved he was to see him again, gratitude mixing with fragile happiness. Kaminari watched the reunion with a soft expression. Deku continued to speak to his father until an older man in the room realized the presence of Katsuki. The father asked about Katsuki's arrival, and Deku stepped back to look at Katsuki. Deku explained that Katsuki had been the one who found him and had given him a home, and he added warmly that Katsuki had been very kind to him. The older man regarded Katsuki with a long, steady look that made Katsuki swallow. Deku, encouraged by the moment, asked whether the two men knew each other. The older man said that Katsuki had once been his student at UA. Katsuki answered awkwardly, trying to keep his composure. The father emphasized how important Deku was to him, making his attachment clear. Katsuki, taken aback and feeling a rush of conflicting emotions, muttered to himself that he wished the boy were his, then quickly corrected himself and tried to recover his composure. The father became serious and told Deku that they needed to discuss something important. Deku prepared to step away, but the father insisted he stay. Katsuki sensed the conversation would not go well and watched as Deku looked at his father with concern. The father explained that Deku was an adult now, but that he had lost 2 critical years that would need to be made up. He admitted that, because of his health, he could not personally oversee Deku's education and would ask Aizawa to teach him everything as soon as possible. Katsuki did not like where the conversation was headed and knew Deku was beginning to understand. Deku smiled through his worry and asked why there was so much urgency. The father answered that he needed Deku to be ready to assume responsibility quickly. Deku, still holding his father's hand, protested that his father was there and that everything would be all right. The father, voice breaking, said that time was running out for him. Deku cried out at the thought, refusing to accept it. Toshinori hugged him and cried heavily, explaining that he had brought him into his home to give him a better life, but that sometimes circumstances were difficult. Midoriya refused, clinging to Toshinori's arms. The younger blonde, Denki, whispered Midoriya's name softly. Katsuki tried to say that Midoriya did not remember, but he was interrupted. Midoriya agreed to take on the responsibility, but he set one condition. He asked Toshinori to promise that he would get better and stand by Midoriya's side when Midoriya became president. Toshinori smiled faintly and promised that he would be there no matter what. Visiting hours ended and the 2 boys prepared to leave. Before they did, the younger boy jumped into his father's arms and promised that he would come tomorrow and every day, waving goodbye. Toshinori responded warmly, pleased to see his child stronger and older. By Toshinori's request, Aizawa took the boys to Toshinori's large mansion. Kirishima had to return to Japan for work and, at his request, took Denki with him. The mansion was roughly twice the size of Katsuki's, which left Katsuki feeling embarrassed, though the freckled boy knew it would belong to him one day. Midoriya collapsed onto the large sofa, exhausted and ready to sleep, but rest would not come so easily. Aizawa arrived with a stack of books and told Midoriya that he would begin intense studies immediately. Aizawa explained that he would give exams every 2 days and that they would not be easy. If Midoriya failed a single one, he would have to forget about the presidency entirely. Aizawa's presence felt stern and serious. Katsuki mocked him and laughed, while Midoriya pouted. Aizawa indicated that Katsuki would be the one helping with the training. Denki cheered enthusiastically, his small laugh bright and victorious. Katsuki muttered that it was almost cute, but that the kid would be around all the time. The chance to apologize to the freckled boy slipped away when he lost sight of him. When news arrived that the 3 missing people had been found, Shoto took the first plane to the United States. It felt strange because Izuku Midoriya had been in Japan when the kidnapping occurred in the US, and he lived with his father. For that reason Shoto had been suspicious too. Now, however, he was sure the freckled boy was not guilty. Shoto was on his way to the hospital when his phone rang. He answered and his sister told him that their father had said he was in the United States and that she was at their father's beach house. Shoto confirmed that he was in New York, in Central Park. His sister noted that it was only 2 hours away and asked if he would go see Ida-kun. Shoto said he would, and his sister said she would wait in case he could make it. Her concern brought him a small measure of comfort. At the large hospital, after paying the taxi, Shoto stepped through the glass doors. A familiar hospital smell brought back memories of weekly visits in Japan when their mother had welcomed him with open arms. When he returned to Japan, the first thing he planned to do was visit her. At reception, a brown-haired woman typing quickly confirmed his purpose. Shoto said he had come to see Tenya Ida. The receptionist asked for his name. He identified himself as Shoto Todoroki. She explained that they needed to track who entered and left, especially regarding a kidnapping victim, and directed him to floor A4. Room guards and police were posted throughout the floor, which felt normal in a situation like this. When Shoto reached the door, it opened to reveal Ida's older brother, Tensei. Tensei greeted Shoto warmly and mentioned that Tenya had just woken up and would be happy to see him. Tensei hurried away, leaving Shoto alone. Inside the private room, Shoto found Tenya with tired, dimmed eyes. The younger man had bandages on his hands and forehead, scrapes on his face, and looked thinner than the last time Shoto had seen him. Both legs were in casts. Tenya spoke in a hoarse, weak voice and apologized, saying he had not been able to protect them. Shoto moved to the chair beside the bed and reassured him that it was not his fault, that no one was to blame. They embraced and cried together, sharing the same shaken grief. Tenya kept insisting that he had done nothing, that he had not been able to save them. He added that Midoriya had tried to help, but their captors had forced him into making a terrible choice, and then Tenya faltered. Shoto leaned closer, met his eyes, and gently wiped away his tears. Shoto told him there was nothing to forgive and offered a sincere smile. Tenya also revealed that Uraraka had been unable to bear the situation and had left. Their expressions showed how shattered their hearts were. Both had lost what mattered most to them. They cried until their eyes were swollen and red. After the crying subsided, Tenya asked about Izuku. Shoto answered that Izuku was physically okay but was having trouble remembering some things. Tenya sighed in relief, and Shoto allowed himself a faint smile. Tensei returned with 2 trays of food and said he would leave to attend to other matters. Tenya's face brightened when he saw the food. He seemed mentally steadier than when Shoto arrived. Tensei left, happy to see his younger brother improving. Tenya had difficulty holding the spoon because his hands hurt and he accidentally spilled some cold soup onto his gown. Shoto apologized for the spill, and Tenya laughed nervously, insisting it was fine and that he could manage. Shoto took the spoon to help feed him, and Tenya blushed. Both were clearly embarrassed but found the moment tender. They spent the day together watching movies, talking, and remembering things from high school. Nostalgic memories came easily and provided a welcome distraction. As visiting hours drew to a close, neither wanted to part. Shoto suggested he would ask permission to stay and sleep there. He explained that with his mother he had been allowed to sleep at the house before and that, if he could get some sheets, he could rest on the couch. Shoto pointed to the guest armchair. In private hospitals, visitors could stay in an armchair in the same room. There was a television and a private bathroom. The victorious bicolored hero settled in the large chair, ready to stay the whole night. The patient on the bed thanked Shoto, expressing that Shoto's company made him very happy. Shoto replied that being with him also made him happy and admitted, with a smile, that he felt a great weight had been lifted. Both of them looked up at the ceiling. The older man agreed and laughed. Shoto, amused and curious, asked what was wrong. The older man sighed and said he had never imagined being like this with Shoto. Shoto answered that he had never imagined it either, and added that he liked it. The older man suggested they should always be together and support one another, and he nodded in agreement. When the older man asked for a promise, Shoto promised. They looked at each other like close friends, unaware that their bond would grow into something more sooner than they expected. 2 broken hearts. Together they would work to mend them and move forward, through difficulties or without them. Destined or not, it was certain they would be together. This is wrong and that is wrong, the explosive blonde snapped, trying to explain to the younger boy that his answers were incorrect. The freckled boy apologized and promised to try harder. The black-haired man laughed and reminded the young Midoriya that algebra had never been his strength. The freckled boy nervously tried to name the right person when prompted, and his eyes widened when he realized Ito was the one. Aizawa remembered that Ito was in the hospital. The freckled boy brightened at the news that Ito was alive and insisted they had to go see him, moving restlessly from one foot to the other. The explosive blonde warned the freckled boy to calm down and pointed out the late hour. The freckled boy checked the clock in the large room and laughed at the time. 2:30 in the morning. Days passed like years to the small boy. Tired from so much studying, time felt slow. He had learned to do nothing, sleep, eat, and watch his favorite show largely because of the influence of a certain grumpy blonde. Being sent to study intensely overnight felt harsh, but it was not all bad. He loved reviewing things he had already learned and discovering more. What truly troubled him was algebra, especially when his dear partner tried to teach him, and lessons with that ill-tempered, explosive boy felt unbearable at times. Everything was actually going well. Deku was progressing more and more, and remembering Ida had been the most exciting moment. The most touching part had been seeing Todoroki apologize. 2 boys were studying hard because the freckled boy had forgotten everything. An adult slept calmly while a bicolored boy and a black-haired man arrived in the room with the help of the butler. The bicolored boy flung himself to the floor in shame before the freckled boy and sincerely apologized for blaming him without reason. The freckled boy gently lifted his head and gave him a warm, forgiving smile. Someone muttered a harsh remark in the distance, but the apology stood. Izuku Midoriya and Tenya Ida managed to speak, though much of their time together was spent crying. Losing great friends was unbearable. Knowing they might never see them again felt suffocating. Memories came easier now. Achiko Uraraka, Izuku's best friend, surfaced in his mind like an unwelcome mosquito, and tears flowed so freely that the blonde could not bear it and wrapped the younger boy in a comforting embrace. Tenya Ida prepared to carry on the years they had lost and vowed to make Uraraka's dreams come true through the big project she had invented. 2 months of intense studying passed. The ash blonde paced anxiously while speaking with his mother on the phone, impatient to see the freckled boy. His mother promised she would be there in 2 days, and she hung up, leaving the blonde simmering with frustration. He did not dislike returning to the company and becoming the best president. What troubled him was the idea that doing so might mean losing sight of his freckled partner. If they were both presidents, work would consume them, and he feared they could no longer see each other every day as they had been doing. He had given his word to his mother, and he was the kind of person who kept his promises. The first thing he did was speak with Deku. He strode into the house library and found his boy sitting on the table reading a book on robotics. The blonde greeted him with a sharp insult, angered that his partner continued reading without even looking up. Deku apologized and explained that his father had urged him to hurry so that people would stop noticing his absence. The blonde sighed, understanding, and told Deku that he would not bother him and to keep working. Deku promised to do his best and cheerfully asked if they would speak later. The blonde left without answering, wounded. He realized everything would be like this now, distant, curt, and full of responsibilities he could not prevent. He remembered with a painful clarity the moments when the freckled boy could not speak up, when he had walked with nerves, when he could not choose freely. He feared that the freckled boy would leave him, stop loving him. They both feared the same thing, losing each other. Another day began and the blonde prepared his things for the return. He had not been able to speak with his freckled companion because the younger had been so busy. He searched the library where the younger spent almost all his time, even sleeping, since that was the only place he could spend time with him. He found him there, working on Aizawa's exam while the younger rested on his futon. He needed to tell him that he had to be presented to his mother the next day, but the younger did not seem fully awake. When the exam finished, they had time to eat and watch a little television. In the corridor, the blonde greeted the other with a wide smile. He asked the younger to request a day off, maybe 2, because there were matters they needed to handle and they had to leave immediately. The younger, nervous and startled, said he would tell Aizawa and his father. The blonde had waited a long time to see that reaction that he liked so much. The green-haired youth went to visit his father as usual, telling him about his new experiences and his learning, but this time he came for a different reason. He asked his father if he could accompany Kaken to Japan. His father replied that it was fine and told him to have fun, winking. The younger protested, flustered and embarrassed, and his father laughed at his reaction. His father added that the blonde seemed to have a problem, which made the younger more grateful when his father gave his permission. He jumped into his father's arms for a warm hug. A hospital room door opened and a blonde woman with a bright smile announced the time for the medicine. The older man greeted her and told the younger it was time to go. The younger felt a chill of recognition at the woman's face. When she smiled, he suddenly remembered where he had seen that expression before. The woman then introduced herself politely and mentioned his name, which surprised him. She greeted him as Midoriya and he wondered how she knew his name. She laughed and said that everyone knew the lost son of the president, and he felt awkward, apologized, and bade his father farewell. Back at the blonde's house, he waited downstairs for the younger to hurry and come down. He called that he was ready and warned him not to run or he would trip. As if on cue, the younger stumbled on the large stairs and landed awkwardly. He rubbed his knees and the older moved to help. They found themselves much closer than usual, and both noticed the closeness with surprise. They stared at each other for a moment, stunned by how long it had been since they had been that near. The sudden closeness became tense and then awkward. They both pulled back and composed themselves, agreeing that they needed to leave. The blonde suggested that they continue whatever needed resolving once they were in Japan, and the younger nodded, flushed and breathing a little harder from the rush of emotions. The trip to Japan was long and tiring, and the younger's mother was waiting to meet him. They arrived at the older man's house exhausted, quickly unpacked, and dressed formally to go to the Bakugo company. Kaminari received them cheerfully and hugged them, which irritated the blonde enough that he shoved him aside. At the company, people approached them with questions about the blonde's absence and the sudden arrival of the president's son, which only made the explosive young man more annoyed. When they reached the main office, Mitsuki Bakugo opened the door and hugged her spoiled son warmly, scolding him for making her worry. The younger watched that affectionate scene, touched by how much his mother seemed to care. Mitsuki complimented the younger and asked his name with curiosity. The younger bowed and introduced himself as Izuku. Mitsuki paused, surprised to hear the name Midoriya, and asked if he had been Toshinori before. The younger explained that his father had adopted him when he was very young and had kept the family name to remember his past. He admitted that he had almost forgotten his birth father until his return. Mitsuki said she had not recognized him the first time she had seen him because he had looked very different, and the younger, smiling, credited the blonde for helping him recover. Mitsuki laughed and teased that her son was not that foolish. The younger declared that Kakin was his hero, raising his fist in the air, which softened the blonde's expression. Mitsuki teased the couple with gentle warmth, saying she thought they suited each other and that it was obvious how fond they were. The two young men were embarrassed and flustered by her teasing, but Mitsuki only hugged them both affectionately. She then leaned closer to the younger and, with a playful tone, remarked that he had never been with anyone before and that she had worried he might have been lonely. The younger and the blonde exchanged nervous glances. The conversation trailed off, and the family shared a light, awkward laugh before turning their attention to other matters. They settled into the visit, and the group prepared for the next day's introductions and obligations. The blonde was interrupted by his son. He grabbed Izuku's arm and dragged him toward the door, urging them to leave. Their mother cheerfully told her blonde son she would wait for him tomorrow and asked him to treat Izuku well as she waved goodbye. Katsuki pulled Izuku along, ignoring the stares of the people around them. Izuku protested that it hurt, and Katsuki muttered an embarrassed insult under his breath. Another family member smiled and remarked that it would be fine, that one less person knew nothing to worry about. Katsuki quickly took out his phone and called his driver. Katsuki told Kaminari not to come for them and that they would go in the company car. He instructed Kaminari to take Kirishima far from his house. Kaminari asked if something had happened and then teased Katsuki not to be so hard on Izuku or he would cry. Katsuki grumbled and dismissed the joking. On the drive, Izuku startled at every movement. Katsuki noticed and reached for Izuku's hand. When they arrived at Katsuki's large house, Izuku's nerves worsened. Izuku assured Katsuki that he would not be forced into anything and that his earlier words did not matter, he was simply nervous. Katsuki told him they would go inside. Katsuki opened the door with a teasing comment about ladies first. Izuku lightly swatted him and went inside, both of them laughing. As they moved down the hallway, a soft melody grew clearer and Izuku grew increasingly excited. The music led them to the dining room. The dining area had been transformed. A white tablecloth embroidered with roses covered the table. A glass vase held red and white roses. Two place settings and glasses indicated a dinner for two. Candles and scattered rose petals filled the room. In one corner, a gigantic teddy bear held a bouquet of flowers. Katsuki told Izuku that it might sound foolish, but he had never felt this way about anyone and needed to express it. Izuku wiped tears of joy and asked how Katsuki had managed it, overwhelmed by the beauty of the room. Katsuki laughed and reminded Izuku that he was the one speaking to him, then urged him to eat before the food got cold. Izuku sat and admired the flowers while Katsuki brought the main dish. Katsuki placed a generous bowl of pork cutlet over rice for Izuku and told him to enjoy it. Izuku brightened at the sight of his favorite dish and thanked him, savoring the first bite. Katsuki explained that Izuku deserved this for his efforts and added, somewhat sadly, that they might be apart for a while. Katsuki said he would not be returning to the United States with Izuku because of responsibilities at home, but he promised to visit when he could and insisted they enjoy the evening together. Izuku returned the smile, comforted. The meal was delicious, one of the best Izuku had tasted, though he still favored Katsuki's cooking. He hugged the large teddy bear, and Katsuki stepped behind him to put an arm around him, teasing that Izuku should not hug it in front of him because it made him jealous. Katsuki whispered something affectionate in Izuku's ear that left Izuku blushing. They shared a quiet, private moment together before returning to the evening's gentle warmth. They laughed. Deku was flushed bright red, feeling Kaken's well-formed torso as the older boy laughed at his expressions. Kaken smiled mischievously and asked if Deku liked it, and Deku answered shyly that he did. Kaken murmured in his ear for him to touch more, sending a shiver through Deku. Kaken shifted, moving beneath Deku. Deku's gaze traveled over the larger body beneath him, his face burning as he grew bolder. His eyes lingered on Kaken's strong chin, and he leaned in to press a timid kiss to the pale skin, hearing heavy sighs from the other. He placed small, gentle kisses along Kaken's collarbone and neck, gaining confidence while Kaken restrained the urge to be reckless because he adored Deku's timid touch. A private, NTMT moment followed that deepened their connection. Kaken teased that Deku had had his fun and that it was his turn now. Deku startled as the position reversed and found himself caught beneath Kaken. They continued in private. The XPLCT details are not described here. Their closeness intensified until both of them reached a point of exhaustion. In the intensity of the moment, they called each other's names. Kaken collapsed over Deku and Deku wrapped his arms around him with tenderness. Deku, breathless, confessed that he loved Kaken. Kaken, equally breathless, returned the sentiment and called Deku an affectionate fool. They broke the embrace only to share one last tender kiss before settling together on the wide couch to sleep wrapped in each other's arms. For the first time, two souls came together with love as the reason, and they hoped to stay together forever. Izuku was the first to wake. He rubbed his eyes and looked around, not remembering how he had ended up in Katsuki's room instead of on the sofa. He felt a sharp ache in his back and something uncomfortable. He covered his face in embarrassment over the vague memories of the previous night. Deciding to take a shower to try to relieve the pain, Izuku moved carefully despite the discomfort. He limped to the bathroom and managed a brief, relaxing bath that helped him feel a little more steady. Stepping out wrapped in a large towel, Izuku found Katsuki watching and laughing. Katsuki mocked how Izuku looked, grinning broadly. Izuku blushed and clutched his towel, feeling awkward under the teasing. Katsuki told him to get ready because their flight left at 10:30 a.m., then said he would take a shower himself and ruffled Izuku's hair with a rough, affectionate motion. Once they were ready, Katsuki called Denki, hoping this time the freckled boy would be early. Denki, true to form, arrived late, testing Katsuki's patience. Katsuki barked orders and hustled everyone into the car, tossing a suitcase into the trunk and getting himself in quickly after the others. Denki apologized for the traffic and tried to look contrite, but Katsuki was already impatient and pushed him to hurry. They arrived with just enough time, despite nearly colliding with a few cars and almost knocking over an elderly woman on the sidewalk. At the gate, they hurried through the crowd and when it was time to part, Izuku and Katsuki embraced tightly. Izuku held on and, eyes shining with tears, waved as he moved toward the boarding area. The embrace ended, and Katsuki watched him go, letting the emotions he had been holding in spill over in a string of loud, angry exclamations. A small child nearby noticed and pointed him out to his mother, who pulled the child away discreetly. After the hectic farewell, Katsuki slipped back into his usual routine, resuming the work-focused life he had before Izuku. That life had once been satisfying, but now it meant less time with Izuku, and the thought hurt him. Izuku had changed many small things about Katsuki's daily life: how he ate, what he watched, even how he slept, and his time now felt consumed by thoughts of Izuku. At work, Katsuki's demeanor soured. His mother, expecting to lecture him as she often did, asked what was wrong with a kind tone. Katsuki snapped at her angrily. She pushed back with a fierce, maternal reprimand and reminded him that she had every right to be concerned. Then she teased him about Izuku, suggesting that people might be watching over Izuku and jabbing that she hadn't expected a boy to affect him so strongly. Katsuki clenched his fists at the thought. Worried about Izuku's safety, Katsuki called a close friend and told him to hire 4 private bodyguards to accompany Izuku immediately. His friend protested that Izuku already had his own protections, but Katsuki insisted and told him to follow orders. The friend agreed, albeit reluctantly. Katsuki's mother watched him with a mix of surprise and concern at his overprotective response, but she handed over the company paperwork when he asked and expressed faith that her son would learn to treat others better. She had noticed, from a distance, that he had changed and that Izuku's influence had softened him in ways she appreciated. Elsewhere, colleagues compared notes about Izuku's condition. One reported that his health had worsened compared to a previous visit, yet Izuku had endured more than anyone had expected. Another recounted seeing Izuku at the hospital and remarked on how well he seemed to be holding up. A third, frustrated and desperate, muttered that he needed the threats around Izuku dealt with and stopped. Izuku arrived in the United States exhausted. Aizawa met him at the airport and helped with his luggage, asking how the trip had been. Izuku answered quietly, unsure, and Aizawa announced that they would be studying late into the night. Izuku quietly admitted to himself that he missed Katsuki, though Katsuki did not hear him. The days that followed passed slowly for both of them. They both pushed themselves through long hours of work and study so that stolen moments together would be possible. 2 months later, the intense study was paying off. The long hours and preparation had readied Izuku for the responsibilities ahead, and the day of the appointment and celebration arrived. Important guests from around the world would attend: allies, friends, and family. Ida coordinated the preparations for the ceremony, with Todoroki assisting him throughout the arrangements. The freckled boy noticed there was something more than simple friendship between some of his classmates. Wherever one went, the other was always there. They were practically inseparable, and he had heard that Ida and Todoroki would be working on a project together, which eased some of his doubts. With Katsuki it was different. Both of them had been busy and had not been able to see each other for 2 months. They could barely talk on the phone at night, and those calls were far too brief for his liking. He looked forward to the night when he could see the person he cared about once more. A worried black-haired student asked Midoriya if he was all right. Midoriya admitted that he was nervous because many people would be attending. Todoroki, trying to encourage him, said that everything would turn out fine. Midoriya thanked Todoroki cheerfully. Tenya Ida patted Midoriya on the back with his robotic touch and suggested he go rest and leave the preparations to them. Midoriya, concerned about his father's poor condition, said he would take the opportunity to visit him and that they would see each other that night. He then left with his bodyguard. Tetsu greeted them energetically when he arrived. Midoriya responded and explained that he was going to see his father, taking Tetsu's hand and leading him out of the room. Since Katsuki had sent Tetsu, Monoma, Kendo, and Shiro, Midoriya and Tetsu had developed a close friendship. They were often together because Shiro spent time at the mansion and Kendo worked as a secretary. Katsuki had replaced the driver with Monoma for security reasons. When Tetsu and Midoriya reached the hospital, Midoriya asked Tetsu to wait outside the room because of his father's condition. Tetsu agreed and stood motionless at the door, taking his duty to protect Izuku very seriously. Entering the room, Midoriya felt a sharp ache in his chest at the sight of his father surrounded by medical equipment. His father's illness had been wearing him down and left him scarcely able to move. Midoriya greeted his father with a strained smile, fighting back tears. His father managed a faint response, his voice weak and tired. Midoriya moved closer and took his father's cold, thin hands. He spoke to his father with tenderness and joy, telling him that they had made it and that today was the day their dream had come true. His father's attempts at speech came out as soft, tired sounds, with only a few words coming through clearly. He tried to return a smile for his son. A doctor entered and startled Midoriya. The doctor addressed Midoriya by name and informed them that it was time for his father's checkups. Midoriya understood and wiped the tears from his eyes, telling the doctor he would come again tomorrow. The doctor congratulated him with genuine enthusiasm. Midoriya forced a smile, hugged his father gently, said goodbye, and promised to return the next day. Everything felt like part of a larger conspiracy. The suspects should have been behind bars by now. It was impossible not to know their whereabouts. Nights went by without sleep while they chased any lead. After his recovery, Ida had given some important information but not enough to find them, and they did not even know the faces of the criminals because, according to the young man, all of them wore masks. A staff member asked Aizawa whether Izuku had revealed anything useful. Aizawa replied that there was no time to interrogate him and that Yagi had insisted the boy should not be forced to relive the trauma until he was stable enough to provide testimony. The staff member then asked if Aizawa believed Yagi would make it through, and Aizawa sighed that he did not know. They were blind to the danger right in front of them. By 8 in the evening the guests were arriving at the grand hall, where modern fixtures decorated the splendid space. A large crystal chandelier scattered light across the room and a spotlight cast gleams over the crowd. Tables were set with silk and linen. Everything had been prepared thanks to the cooperation of Ida and Todoroki. High society guests chatted with the freckled young man, Izuku, who wore a navy suit tailored to his frame and his hair neatly styled back. He attracted many admirers. The atmosphere fell silent when 3 young people and 2 adults entered with striking poise. Izuku's attention locked on a man in an elegant black suit and a red tie whose eyes seemed unusually sharp. In Izuku's eyes, that man Katsuki was perfect. Izuku walked toward Katsuki, yearning to be close. When he realized walking was not enough, he ran. Ignoring the calls and the curious glances of high society, he rushed into Katsuki's arms. The embrace was impulsive and the two stumbled, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Izuku called out for Katsuki in his rushing emotion, and Katsuki reacted with obvious surprise. Kaminari laughed and took photos, and the Bakuga family was present in the crowd, the vice president and, for reasons unknown, a blond man claiming to be their chauffeur stood nearby. When they rose, Izuku remained clinging to Katsuki despite the awkwardness. The murmurs subsided when Aizawa appeared at the front, looking unusually formal in an elegant suit and carrying a microphone. Aizawa announced that Yagi Toshinori would not be able to attend that night, but introduced the event's next moment, the presentation of the new president of BMW. Applause followed as Izuku stepped toward the small stage. From the floor, Izuku saw Katsuki's bright smile, and it calmed the nerves that had built up inside him. Izuku mounted the stage and acknowledged Aizawa before addressing the audience. Izuku thanked everyone present for their support and first paid tribute to a man who had cared for him like a father, Yagi Toshinori, noting that although Yagi could not be there, he felt his support. Izuku also expressed gratitude to his friends who had stood by him during the 2 years he had been away: Tenya Ida, Shoto Todoroki, Ochako Uraraka, and Momo Yaoyorozu, who had aided his growth even if they were not present that evening. Turning his attention to Katsuki, Izuku spoke directly about how grateful he was that Katsuki had come into his life one afternoon and helped him learn to trust again. He credited Katsuki with showing him what it meant to care for someone and said that Katsuki had been the reason he had been able to return to his father and move forward after the events 2 years ago. Izuku then made a heartfelt public declaration of his feelings for Katsuki, calling him the reason he had kept going. The crowd murmured in astonishment. Guests watched the blushing Katsuki with wide eyes as he struggled with embarrassment. Kirishima and Kaminari were moved to tears and had already started streaming the moment live. Mitsuki hugged her husband in quiet excitement while he smiled at their son's flustered expressions. The speech had become, unmistakably, a public declaration of affection. After the declaration and the endless rounds of thanks, dinner was served. Everyone toasted happily at the celebration. Even the older teacher Aizawa was enjoying the wine with colleagues, but he stepped away to answer a call. Midoriya, the freckled boy, forced a smile and tried to hide the sadness that weighed on him. A classmate noticed and asked Midoriya what was wrong. Midoriya forced a grimace and insisted that everything was fine. The classmate, concerned, teased him and ruffled his hair. Midoriya began to say something about his father's health, but Aizawa returned, more serious than usual, and told Midoriya that they had to go to the hospital. Midoriya ran through the hospital without stopping, followed by a blonde and a dark-haired companion. Something felt terribly wrong. He reached his father's room breathless only to find that it was already too late. He let out an anguished scream that echoed through the corridor. Staff and visitors blocked the doorway, Midoriya struggled and lashed out in panic, desperate to get inside, calling for his father. The blonde restrained him and tried to calm him while shouting for a stretcher. Overwhelmed by grief and exhaustion, Midoriya collapsed and fainted in the blonde's arms. When Midoriya's eyes opened, a blonde man was asleep in a chair by the bed. His voice was hoarse and weak as he asked where his father was. The blonde woke immediately, stroked Midoriya's face gently, and said he was glad Midoriya had woken. Midoriya asked, through sobs, whether the blonde would leave him too. The blonde did not answer with any romantic gestures. Instead he held Midoriya and spoke comforting words, promising he would not abandon him. Midoriya cried until he had no strength left, and the blonde stayed by his side through the night, offering quiet support and wiping his tears. In Midoriya's hand was a note from his father that read, "Keep going, son." Far from that hospital, a different atmosphere prevailed. One of the villains rejoiced that Yagi Toshinori had finally died. They had been poisoning him for years, and the long work had finally reached its end. Among them, a severely scarred man asked Tamura if something was wrong. Tamura kept his demonic smile but listened as the scarred man explained that the blonde man seemed to sense something and had taken back the driver position from one of their people, which would complicate their plans. A blonde woman suggested that they send her instead, but Dabi objected, saying the blonde still recognized her as the old man's nurse. They all acknowledged that they and their associate Kurogiri had already been seen. If they continued like this, they would be caught quickly. One of them added angrily that if not for Stain, Midoriya would have been dead. Stain, known for hunting corrupt criminals, had once answered Tamura's call to work with him. At first he had agreed, but when he had found Midoriya tied to a chair and recognized him despite his weakened state, Stain could not bring himself to hand him over. Aware of Midoriya's kind family, Stain freed him and left him where he would be quickly recognized, making sure Midoriya would be taken somewhere safe. After that, Stain never returned to the place Tamura operated from. Now, someone watched every move from eyes filled with cold resolve. He was furious. He had learned who was responsible for Toshinori's death and had begun to put his dark plans into motion. A sweet high school girl walked to the supermarket for new kitchen knives, humming a sugary song as she trotted along like an innocent child. She bought everything she thought she would need for that night: knives, candles, and syringes, and had lured an unsuspecting boy once again, planning a terrifying surprise for him. She half-joked to herself that she wished it had been Izuku. She arrived home ready to open the door, but it was already too late. A bag of groceries lay in front of the door and a head rolled across the floor. Later, preparing for sleep, someone longed only for a deep rest. He took his old, misshapen pillow and thought about tomorrow's plan to confront the green-haired target, a plan Tamura had insisted on. The black-haired man cursed himself for not turning off the light. It was now late and he felt too lazy to get up. Before he had to, the room's light went out on its own. Startled, he rose and switched it back on, finding a note on the bedside table that read, "Behind you." He turned quickly and was knocked to the floor. Strong hands grabbed him and forced his face into the ground. He tried to rise but was restrained, then brought to a bed and bound tightly. Someone with a macabre smile approached and announced that it was time for the operation. He was restrained while the attacker performed a brutal, off-stage procedure that left him mortally wounded. Kurogiri cried out in pain and begged for help, but no one came. When it was over, the attacker took the doctor's heart and placed it in a cooler, saying that the organ would be used for illicit transplants. Tamura was alone in a bar when he began to hear footsteps in his head, counting off with each imagined step. He heard a knock at his door and found nothing at first, then noticed a pizza box on the floor. A note attached said it was a gift from his teacher and claimed it was his favorite. He smiled and brought the pizza to the table, opened a beer, and read more on the note. Inside, the pizza held a horrifying surprise. The toppings were composed of human remains shaped into pieces that made his stomach drop. Upon closer inspection, he recognized some of them as belonging to people he knew. He turned, searching the room for anyone, and found none. Overwhelmed, he clutched his hair and sobbed, calling out for his teacher and crying in disbelief at what had been done. Stain stood nearby and taunted him, asking what it felt like to have someone he considered a father figure killed, and insisting that those like them deserved worse. The younger man lunged at Stain with a knife in a desperate attempt to retaliate, but in the struggle Stain grabbed him and violently tore at his hair. He then aggressively disabled his hands, leaving him unable to fight. Stain mocked him and treated the removed hands as trophies. The boy whispered one last, broken word to his teacher before passing away. That night, the teenage girl, the driver, the doctor, and the friend were all dead. Authorities later discovered evidence linking those victims to the kidnapping and killing of Yagi Toshinori, and more than 10 bodies were found in that bar, including 2 young women whose identities were known. The findings were kept from the public and from the families to avoid further fallout, a decision some officials supported for the sake of Midoriya. In the end, those who had acted violently reaped bitter consequences. Careful choices mattered, because one-day actions would bear fruit, and those fruits could be bitter. He truly hated that place. Seeing so much pain in one room was unbearable. Sometimes, without meaning to, the sorrow seemed to seep into him, as if the deceased were someone close. Funerals were the worst. So many people gathered for someone who was no longer there, an irrational but respectful ritual. Yagi Toshinori had been joyful and brilliant, always giving more than expected and surprising anyone who came near. The hall was full, a parade of remembrance unfolding as if for a public figure. Like when the great comedian passed away, everything felt recorded and observed. At first, the young Izuku refused to attend. All he wanted was to lock himself in his room and cry until there was nothing left to cry. The ashy blonde figure, however, steered him to reason, and Izuku finally went to his father's funeral. He did not want to watch people perform their farewells for 3 days, a drawn-out ceremony harsher than a single burial. What had begun as a celebration had ended in profound grief. Most would forget the day sooner or later, but for the quiet boy who watched in silence, it would follow him for the rest of his life, a memory of the best father he could have had. The greatest creator of technology in the world was gone, and in his place the world welcomed Deku, a name that would carry its own weight. 5 years later, the tension in a car crackled like static. The green-haired Izuku, frustrated by the situation, told Katsuki that it was too late. Katsuki clenched his fists tight to keep from lashing out at the driver. He cursed under his breath. If Izuku was in a bad mood, the blonde with the lightning streak was 10 times worse. Katsuki shouted for them to hurry. Denki Kaminari, the blonde with the lightning streak, protested nervously that it was not his fault and blamed heavy traffic. He spoke with a worried pout. Katsuki erupted, the stress pressing at his temples. He accused Denki of always being late, his words sharp and uncontrolled. Izuku stepped in to soothe Katsuki, telling him to calm down and reaching up in a gentle, reassuring gesture to his cheek. He said they knew Kaminari would never change and that they still had a chance to arrive on time, trying to quell the storm. Denki, grinning through the tension, let go of the steering wheel for a moment and formed a heart with his hands in the rearview mirror, showing it to the freckled one to ease the mood. Katsuki suddenly snapped, warning everyone to watch out for the truck ahead. They came dangerously close to colliding. The driver almost lost control. The car veered with a swift, sudden movement, leaving everyone stunned by the abrupt maneuver. Denki, steadying the wheel, checked that everyone was all right and then continued driving. The freckled young man, a little more disheveled than before, told Kaminari to be more careful. Katsuki addressed Denki with a colder tone. He asked, with a voice trying for calm but blunt at the edges, how he could have thought hiring him was a good idea. The remark quivered with the restrained anger of someone barely holding back. Denki looked puzzled, calling out a name as if seeking another voice, and the moment cut off there, leaving a brief pause in the car as they picked up speed and the road stretched ahead. 5 years had passed since the death of the great Yagi Toshinori. At first, the car company suffered a 20% downturn, which saddened the younger man and pushed the older to pour all his time into the business. Inevitably, the time Katsuki and Izuku spent together dwindled to nothing for months on end, and they could not see each other. That distance did not stop Katsuki. He worked toward transferring to the United States, where the company already had distributors in Los Angeles and New York, because he wanted to bring the whole company closer to the person he loved. It was not easy. The decision had been tremendously difficult, but the blonde had resolved not to give up. 2 years after Yagi's death, the company and its staff arrived in New York. Their parents chose to stay in.